across the 3 spheres of government. And colleagues, as the NCOP committee, our focus is to assess whether the proposed adjustments enables provinces and municipalities to meet their obligations, particularly in basic education, in healthcare, social protection, infrastructure, and youth employment. As a committee, you are also attentive to concerns raised by the provincial equitable share, conditional grant performance, and the impact of fiscal pressures on the frontline services. I would like to thank all the organizations and stakeholders for their continuous support and participation in this process. Your insight strengthens our oversight work as a committee, and it also assists and helps us to ensure that the budget decisions reflect the realities experienced by communities on the ground. I therefore open this meeting, colleagues. Welcome all of you, and we're looking forward to constructive and solution-oriented engagements. Mr. Nodada, I'm going to request that you flag today's agenda and indicate who is in our platform and give members a brief summary on the submissions which we have received as a committee. Over to you, Mr. Nodada and Estelle.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. Chairperson, as indicated by Estelle, all other members are present except so far Honorable Mimalo and Honorable Brits. We have 2 apologies, Chairperson, if I may start with them. An apology from Honorable Khatebe, who is still traveling from Malaysia. We have an apology from Honorable Swartz. He would like to be excused from the meeting at around 12 o'clock. We also received an apology from the Deputy Minister, Honorable Sarupan. He is unable to attend this meeting. With respect to the stakeholders that are present in the meeting, Chairperson, we received a total of, on behalf of the committee, a total of 9 submissions, with 1 submission from Brit Line Africa indicated as a written submission. The other submissions that we received, which colleagues are present on the platform to present, is from Amandla.Mobi. Or Deboho will be presenting. Budget Justice Coalition. I think Lisa will take the lead under PJC. Rural Health Advocacy Project, Russell and Candice, they will take the lead. Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition, Nomangesi, Kanyisa Onumbulelo will take the lead. Equal Education, Mafauz has just indicated that he will be presenting on behalf of Equal Education. Then Section 27, CD and Mduduzi Nkosi will take the lead and present on behalf of Section 27. Then Youth Capital, Clotilde will be presenting. Then the last presenter will be Matthew and representing COSAD. Sorry. Those are the submissions that we received, Chairperson, and the stakeholders that will be making submissions before the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nodada, and colleagues and honorable members on the platform. I would like to bring to your attention that over the weekend, we received 3, if not 4 other submissions that will not be considered as they were submitted after the cut-off date or the last day of the submission. We indicated previously and requested stakeholders in our previous engagements that they should at least try to honor the timelines put by the committee. I don't know, I see the hand of Mr. Nodada on the platform. Maybe he'd like to say something.
Yes, Chairperson, apologies, Chair. I think I was not clear enough when I had a word with you about this. The submissions that we received over the weekend are part of this 9. So the committee is going to listen to colleagues. No submissions are going to be like rejected in terms of our agreement. I was just indicating that the ones that do not appear to the document that we shared with the committee are submissions that reached the committee a little bit late when the consolidation of that committee of that document was already at the final stages. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nodada, but it does not take away the fact that we will not receive, even for future purposes, we will not accept any submissions that is done beyond the date that is set for submission for the submission from stakeholders or individual members of the society. Thank you very much, and let me welcome all the stakeholders once again, honorable members and the support staff. I am not going to waste any time, and I'm going to allow colleagues to have a summary because we received this presentation. I'm going to request each stakeholder at least 10 to 15 minutes to present their submission to the committee. And later, after all presentations are made, I'm going to allow honorable members to engage on the presentations. And members, if we still have time, we'll have to deal with some sets of minutes in today's meeting, but that will be dependent on how far we go with the engagement of today's submissions by stakeholders. I therefore going to immediately invite Amanda Mobi or Deboho to lead the presentation to members. And thank you very much, and you are welcome once again to the committee.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Tlose Opa. I'm from Amanda.mobi. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee again today. Honorable Chair, our presentation will be very short today. The Division of Revenue Amendment Bill and the Appropriation Adjustment Bill are technical documents that will impact millions on the ground. So our presentation today is focused on the lived realities of marginalized communities, and will focus on four main points that are our main work with the work that we do. Honorable Chair, can I please ask permission to share my screen so we can play our presentation in video format?
Mr. Nodada and Estelle, kindly assist.
We have the co-host rights already. Thanks.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we can see the video, but we do not hear any sound coming from the videos.
My apologies, Chair. I had switched off my mic. Apologies. I'll start again.
Millions unemployed, millions living in hunger and poverty, children dying from starvation and hunger.
The cost of living means choosing between mealie meal and electricity. Dear members of the Select Committee on Appropriations, behind the stability and optimism of the MTBPS tabled by Finance Minister Godongwana lies the realities of many people who struggle to survive on a daily basis. While the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill reflects stable allocations as reflected in the 2025 budget, we still want to emphasize the fact that National Treasury's austerity measures in the past have done too much damage, and millions continue to suffer from them, rendering the current budget allocations still not enough. Millions in Mzansi continue to suffer from hunger and poverty, with children dying from acute malnutrition and starvation. As unemployment continues to rise, access to nutritious food remains a challenge, and many households struggle to put food on the table. The 2025 MTBPS has portrayed the National Treasury's optimism in keeping promises and growing the economy faster. However, it still failed to provide immediate, clear plans on how the minister intends to lift millions out of poverty.
Honorable members, many of you agree that the SRD grant has had a massive impact in helping people afford their daily needs. We welcome the decision to extend the grant to March 2027. This reflects the commitment to turn the grant into a permanent intervention that will enable millions to put food on the table. However, we are concerned that the budget allocated for the SRD grant is still not enough to cover all people who qualify for the grant and are still getting excluded.
We are also very concerned about the manner in which SRD grant recipients are being treated in the name of stopping fraud on the grant system. It is unacceptable that SRD grant beneficiaries are paying the price for the DSD and SASSA's ill management of the social grant system.
We continue to be concerned that the government continues to hesitate to be clear about the plans for the basic income grant. Promises were made after countless calls to implement the basic income grant.
Again, the MTBPS did not give us clear goals for the BIC, which is quite disappointing to say the least. A basic income is necessary because our country has failed to stimulate economic growth. Although National Treasury is very optimistic, but optimism does not translate to an automatic solution. The people have waited long enough. It is about time the BIC is intentionally reflected in future budgets.
The minister has once again stated that the government is working on new tax proposals, and we still welcome and commend the decision to capacitate SARS to collect more tax and stop illicit financial flows. We continue to call on this committee to support implementing more taxes for the super rich. A survey by Oxfam South Africa and Patriotic Millionaires has found that 64% of South African millionaires would support a 2% wealth tax to fund social programs. Increasing taxes for the ultra-rich is no longer a topic of debate. It is a necessary step that needs to be taken. For far too long, the rich have hoarded more and more wealth while the poor continue to suffer.
Tax for the rich.
We know some here don't agree with the calls to increase the sugary drinks tax. But here's the thing, honorable members. Increasing HPL is more about protecting the country and the resources that go into dealing with the consequences of the consumption of sugary drinks. Big businesses, companies, and some members of parliament who are against a 20% sugary drinks tax are ultimately against a healthy nation. But to what benefit, honorable members? It has been proven many times by countless studies from experts that the sugary drinks tax has been effective in fighting cancer and non-communicable diseases caused by sugary drinks. Mexico did it. Why can't South Africa do it?
We commend this committee for taking forward the issues faced by the majority in this country. We urge this committee to continue standing firm in the realization of pro-poor interventions that will not only lift millions out of poverty, but help improve economic participation and boost economic growth. The Amanda Dodmobi community appreciates the time and consideration, as well as the opportunity to appear before this committee every year to represent the voices of the people.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. That is the end of our presentation.
Thank you very much. So I'll now like to invite Budget Justice Coalition. Lisa will lead the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just am lighting the presentation. Okay, I hope you can see. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, honourable members. Good morning to the others on the platform. My name is Lisa, and I'm a researcher at the BJC, the Budget Justice Coalition. I think many of you know us, but we're a coalition of 25 civic organisations. I won't go through all the details, but some of our members are here today, and they'll be taking you through some of the details. my intention here is to present some of the broader sort of concerns of the BJC. We have made our presentations and submissions to the finance committees and the standing committee on appropriation, but we're here today to share with this committee as well. So our core concerns, we see that consolidation continues despite urgent social and economic crises. We see non-interest spending declining over the MTEF. We see no credible plan for unemployment or inclusive growth. We believe the budget reforms fail to respond to the underlying causes. So looking at the findings from the GTAC review, a lot of the issues are around capacity constraints and compliance. The new reforms, we believe, sort of add further complexity, and without additional resources, we are not sure how successful they'll be. We see that our key social sectors, education, health, social protection, remain underfunded. We're seeing growing service delivery gaps, water and sanitation, housing, roads, etc. We're seeing rising food insecurity and hunger. We're seeing state capacity to deliver quality public services and improve the lives of South Africans continue to weaken, looking at the NPA, SAP, SASSA, Home Affairs, and others. And the BJC has been engaging with communities this year, and the overall sort of sense is that people believe the budgets allocated don't reach them. They don't necessarily understand the documents. They don't know how to engage. And we're seeing similar issues being raised across provinces around basic services, water, street lights, food, jobs, roads and infrastructure, health, crime, etc. So we've put together a set of recommendations. The first one is around placing people at the center of growth. We believe that the existing approach to economic growth relies on investor confidence and structural reforms that have not generated employment. We believe that public investment in health, education, and basic services is the foundation of productivity and resilience. And we believe inclusive growth, requires revitalizing labor-intensive sectors. Yet we see cuts to agro-processing and agriculture, SMMEs. We think it requires expanding public employment, which we don't see in the budget, about strengthening local economic development in the care economy, rebuilding energy and logistics, which we are seeing some progress on, but less so on social infrastructure, schools, libraries, clinics, etc. We raised this in our previous presentation, the question of vacant funded posts and recruitment. In early 2025, 100,000 funded vacant posts in the public sector, many of them vacant for months or years, and we see them concentrated in provincial health, education, as well as some of the national oversight functions, which we think undermines service delivery. The departments have reported challenges that contribute to the vacancies, including budget constraints and the need to reprioritize funds, so the strict administrative processes and the time required for thorough pre-employment verifications. And despite these processes, we still often hear of people being employed to these positions without the necessary skills and qualifications. We're also seeing in the annual reports that there are delays in recruitment, posts aren't advertised within 6 months. And we see in the MTBPS 2025 and the AENE, we're seeing some of these funds for vacant posts being shifted to leave gratuities, laptops, office furniture, etc., which is a concern for us because, of course, these are posts that aren't being filled. We know that there aren't enough doctors, nurses, teachers, etc., and it's unclear whether these are sort of pressures and priorities where they're being shifted to, or whether it's just a little bit unclear what the process is. Our next recommendation is about rebuilding state capacity, where we believe that a capable, well-funded public sector is essential for inclusive development. And we're seeing resource and capacity constraints across state institutions. And this contributes to service delivery failure and the lack of public trust. So we've looked a little bit at anti-corruption agencies. They remain underfunded. And we agree with the Deputy Minister who said that the likelihood of prosecution or consequences is a key deterrent of criminal behavior. I think he was speaking specifically about illicit trade, but the same applies to other other areas as well. We're seeing long queues and slow service at SASSA, at Department of Labour, at Home Affairs. We welcome the new procurement dashboard. Admittedly, we haven't had time to have a look to see whether this will in fact enable the public and others to identify issues, like we've seen at Tembisa, as the Minister said in his speech. But we believe Parliament should continue to strengthen oversight and research some of these systemic issues impacting service delivery. We also think that better citizen participation and accountability monitoring is also required. We believe that there is a need to restore real expenditure growth in health, education, local government, basic services. We're seeing infrastructure grants being reduced or reallocated due to underspending. And this is something that is really a problem. I was reading this morning about Nelson Mandela Bay potentially, to lose about 500 million rand in their conditional grants, while those in charge are arguing about what to do. So it's citizens and the public who pay the price, and there are no consequences for those who are responsible. So we're seeing cuts to teacher posts, health staffing, social programs. We think real recovery requires protecting and expanding core services, targeted hiring and frontline services, and rebuilding provincial and municipal capacity. And we see that under-resourcing has social and economic impacts, the long queues, as we've spoken about, inadequate healthcare provision, medical legal costs, which we've seen rising in the past, and knock-on inefficiencies. We believe that social protection needs to be strengthened. We are hearing about young people who are applying for jobs, thousands of people arriving for just a few jobs that are advertised. There are simply not enough jobs. We need to have a social protection system that provides the necessary support to those who are unable to find employment. The administrative barriers continue to exclude eligible applicants. And we believe that the SRD grant and the child support grant should be increased to the food poverty line. The exclusionary filters should be removed, and there should be better, clear efforts to develop a permanent income support framework. Around improving the budget process and accountability, I mentioned earlier, the GTAC review found weakened inputs, non-compliance, across the board cuts, misalignment between planning and budgeting, and the reforms don't necessarily respond or address to these issues. We are seeing that a rigid fiscal anchor risks reducing the flexibility in the budget, the inflation target as well. There is a lot less room for participation, for alternatives. We appreciate that South Africa scores high in transparency, but we think more needs to be done to make documents accessible to citizens. We've also found that it can be a little bit difficult to track funds with the increased allocations to contingency and provisional reserves, and we would like to see better reporting on that. We're a little bit concerned about TARS. We think that it is being used as a blunt cost-cutting tool, not an efficiency mechanism. We've seen cuts to social grants, school infrastructure, tertiary services, and these reflect systemic capability failures, not underperforming programs that aren't required. We believe responsible savings require investment in administrative capacity, transparent criteria for savings decisions, human rights impact assessments to determine the impacts on poverty and inequality, and importantly, data to inform decisions. So we were quite surprised to see that the savings in social protection were celebrated in a time when there is such a rising need. Something that has come out quite strongly is the need to rebuild Stats SA capacity. The quote there at the top is from the Stats SA annual report, where we see resource constraints, particularly insufficient funding for employment, high vacancy rates, inadequate ICT infrastructure have hindered the organization's ability to maintain a fully skilled data collection workforce and sustain quality of statistical indicators. So while we think Stats SA remains a credible institution, chronic underfunding is really starting to impact the outputs, delays in publishing data, and we're hearing talk of reduced surveys, combining surveys, and it's unclear what impact this will have. We already know that large parts of the budget are based on quite outdated social and demographic data. We see stats, Census 2011 still coming up in some of the reports. And really, we believe that Stats SA needs to function effectively to achieve a more better budgeting and better spending. So we recommend additional funds for Stats SA over the MTEF, and we would particularly like to see the time use survey prioritized. We believe this is in the region of about 100 million rand required, and this will be a really important survey to assist with gender responsive budgeting, youth unemployment, and various other necessary interventions. Our last recommendation is about the inadequate provision of gender-based violence shelters. We have heard that government has classified gender-based violence and femicide as a national disaster, but gender-based violence shelters, which provide a lifeline to survivors and vulnerable people, remain under-resourced and inadequate. The 5 key issues we've raised in our written submission are around chronic underfunding, provincial disparities in per beneficiary subsidies, the wage gaps for NPO shelter staff, making it difficult to retain and attract good staff, onerous compliance costs, which are putting pressure under shelters which are already struggling with the funds that are available. I think the figures mentioned there are 200 to 300,000 rand in additional costs that some shelters are facing just to meet the compliance requirements for funding. And we've also seen massive unspent budgets return to Treasury amid bureaucratic delays in Gauteng. And really, this is a very deep concern for us. We believe this needs to be addressed along with other critical elements of the gender-based violence response, including things like the DNA backlog, which we haven't heard a lot of progress around. Last time I heard, I think it was about 140,000 cases, and many of those involving sexual assault. And those are perpetrators who are out on the streets, reoffending, and victims and survivors who don't see justice. In conclusion, we believe stability cannot come at the cost of lives and dignity for South Africans. We'd like to see increased social spending to protect vulnerable households and grow the economy. We support efforts to improve effectiveness of budget allocations, but they must not harm the poor and vulnerable households. We'd like to see improved accountability and oversight to prevent harm from poor spending outcomes. We think that SARS has showed that funding increases can improve outcomes. We'd like to see the same for other departments like Stats SA, NPA, SAPS, and Home Affairs. We believe that quality and timely data is critical for effective planning, and we'd like to see some progress in that area. And finally, we believe that a people-centered budget is necessary and achievable and essential for restoring hope and rebuilding the social compact. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thanks for sticking to time. Rural Health Advocacy Project, Russell or Candice, you're welcome to present to the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again for the opportunity to present to the committee today, and I would just appreciate your consideration as I load my presentation. Am I doing the right thing? Yeah. Okay, let's try again. Thank you for your patience. Again, firstly, let me apologize for my poor tech savviness. in not trying to make this presentation larger than what it should be. But let me start and say that when we started this new government, or the 7th administration, the president and the government of national unity identified 3 broad priorities. The first was increase or inclusive growth. The second was reduce cost of living and jobs. And the third was a capable, ethical, developmental state. Now, our outlook and our presentation today is largely informed by that third priority, a capable and effective developmental state. And that responsibility, or that goal, is really informed more broadly by South Africa's social context, particularly our constitution, and in our instance, the right to health, and so forth. Certainly, we also come to this committee as the National Council of Provinces because the bulk of service delivery, with 85% or 100% of, or let's say 75% of healthcare funding being spent at the provincial level. So some of the issues that come out in our outlook are very concerning around a capable and effective state that delivers healthcare services to populations that need it, when they need it, and where they need it, and of sufficient quality. Let me go to my... So why Parliament must interrogate the 2020-25 health allocations? I think I don't need to remind anybody that this year has been an exceptional year. None of us will forget what happened on January 20th, when the 47th president decided that he would turn his back on years of investment by the American people. And we saw essentially a 20% decline in our national health budget. Right? And I think that has had a significant impact, which we may not be visible immediately, but does require urgent action, because, unfortunately, something that happens in healthcare today will show up 3 years from now. And this budget, in many ways, tightens the noose on provinces who are unable to meet their core responsibilities in addressing the fight against infectious diseases, improve maternal and child health, tuberculosis in particular, which continues to be the leading cause of death. So the 2025 MTBS shows tightening funding and declining real per capita resources over the medium term, which is over the next 3 years. Emerging pressures in HIV and TB treatment combined with insufficient resources, threatened gains may achieved over 15 years. In the case of TB, our most recent performance was reducing incidence in the period 2015 to 2025 by 67%, which is quite significant. But a lot of these gains are at risk. We have close to 6 million people on treatment, with plans to add another 1 million on treatment to contain HIV as a public health threat by 2030, and we're well on track, with 75% or between 70 and 80% of people who know their HIV status currently on treatment. These gains are now at risk. Parliament, and particularly this committee, must decide whether the allocations are adequate to prevent service deterioration and loss of lives. So the macro fiscal dynamics informing the 2025 MTBS. We know that Treasury has been on a path of fiscal consolidation, which broadly means like reducing debt, improving state expenditure and budget execution at all costs, right? And we know that they have achieved some successes, which were well heralded, where we've seen an investment upgrade, the first in a very long time. We've seen marginal increases in economic growth, and we've seen a primary budget surplus. But the question still remains, what is the goal of the state? To produce a surplus budget or to deliver on its constitutional mandates? And unfortunately, based on a lot of the things that we've seen in we recognize in our outlook, it seems that we're placing a great emphasis on financial performance rather than the state responsibility to deliver service, particularly health, education, and social assistance. So the 2025 MTBS is tabled in a context where monetary policy now heavily shapes fiscal outcomes. Treasury has aligned itself to a framework of the SARB, which is a low inflation stance, leading to disinflation-driven reductions in nominal GDP. Right? Lower GDP weakens revenue, worsens debt metrics, and requires deeper spending restraint, even without a change in real economic activity. Consolidation is now structural and no longer temporary, with planned primary budget surpluses at least through the next decade. This means a real per capita funding for core services, constitutionally mandated, which include health, declines over multiple years, despite the significant challenges. Parliament must consider in this committee in particular on who bears the social costs of a low inflation anchor. Does this stance advance constitutional socioeconomic rights? Is it compatible with long-term development priorities? And I think when we introduce new legislation, we have to do an economic impact assessment. But in the case of reducing the inflation target to 3%, none was done. So in many ways, we don't know what the impact of this will be. But our concerns are that but through unguided implementation, we could actually put our gains at risk and not meet the three priorities that the government set for itself at the beginning of the 7th administration. So what does the MBS overall do to the health envelope? You know, across 2025 to 27, health receives 2.5 billion less than announced in the May 2025 budget. For 2025, the District Health Program grant is increased by 590 million in response to the government, as government's response to the cutting of the support received through PEPFAR. This means the early expectations from the budgets of an increase in allocation has been partially reversed. The adjustment is material, especially in a system already operating under strain. The result is a tighter foundation from which HIV/TB programs must operate despite increased need. And I think the table illustrates that. So real per capita, as populations rise, the net amount that must be distributed between the population at risk decreases. So when adjusted for inflation and population, per person public health funding falls across all 3 years of the MTF. This means there's no expansion in service capacity is financially plausible. Even maintaining current levels will be difficult. And you must bear in mind that we've set ourselves very ambitious targets in the 1.1 million campaign in our HIV, which is by far the biggest risk to our system, where we sought to add 1 million people onto treatment this year, effectively containing HIV as a public health risk. But with no service expansion and no new money, it will be difficult to see how those additional patients would be funded and, in a sense, putting the health of millions of South Africans at risk. Real purchasing power is the indicator that matters for clinics, labs, medicines, and staff. Inflation on medical goods, unlike consumer inflation, is much higher, as much of the goods are imported and subject to currency variations. So cost of medicines, consumables, lab tests generally outpaces the 3% target for inflation informing budget allocations. The provincial equitable share, which, Chair, you noted is one of the key concerns of this committee. Provincial health services are funded through two main mechanisms, primarily the provincial equitable share and the conditional grants. The provincial equitable share was increased for 2025 only, which means that the additional funding through the Special Appropriations Bill has not been added to the baseline, and without any new interventions in the 2026-2027 budget, the additional funding or programs supported by the Special Appropriations will not be able to continue in the outer years. After 2025, the pace flattens, meaning no medium-term real growth, despite significant challenges. We know that provinces are running at least 20-odd billion in accruals, meaning that they already don't have enough money to fund their most basic services, often resulting in poor, irrational decisions being made on how services are cut. Provinces must still absorb wage drift, which are notch increases, overtime, medicines inflation, and demographic demand. This creates year-on-year pressure with no new fiscal space. Emerging health pressures that the I indicated earlier that the MTBS does not address is PEPFAR sustainability. There's no funding visible in the baselines that is added to the out years to show that these programs, the amount, the 500 million was already insignificant. Taking that away places much further pressure on the system overall, including research and a whole HIV ecosystem, which could be quite negative for healthcare overall. We know that in the early 2000s, a lot of the population health dynamics that we celebrate today, like lower maternal mortality, increased child survival rates, life expectancy, are all at risk when HIV falters. So beyond 2025, not having additional funding to support the response creates uncertainty for HIV and TB, continuity, as well as provincial planning. We also know that we've had a breakthrough deal on HIV prevention with the lenacapavir 6-monthly injection. Through the support of the Global Fund, we are able to do, for the next 3 years, fully fund 400,000 doses. However, there's no allocations or reference within the budget for funding for nurse training, clinic space, cold chain, patient follow-ups, and all of the other things, as the Global Fund funding only covers the drugs. So we have to figure out how we're going to take advantage of this breakthrough technology with generics planned in year 3, which seek to increase the doses to 2 million a year. Our current service capacity just wouldn't allow that. Similarly, with tuberculosis, for the first time in over 100 years, we have a new vaccine on the horizon. There are large clinical trials running in South Africa, and we expect that this vaccine will be available within the next 3 years after phase 3 trials are completed. We haven't even factored in any small allocation for HR regulation or any other implementation costs that would require the delivery of this vaccine. Again, I'd like to note that TB is the leading cause of death in South Africa at the moment. And while anybody can get it disproportionately affects poor and marginalized people. So the risk of future crises mode rollout planning if planning continues to be delayed. Okay, thank you for your patience. So in conclusion, right, I think politics ultimately shapes the bureaucracy. At the moment, we're battling with the transition from one government to another, and how it determines its priorities is not always transparent. So while we understand the need to stabilize the state finances, this must not come at the cost at the constitutional obligations that the state has. So funding levels in the 2025 MTBS are not aligned with service delivery realities. Real per capita health spending continues to decline, while pressures of key programs like HIV and TB seem unaddressed. Fiscal consolidation, expenditure repression must not hollow out the health system. DARS may help identify inefficiencies, but expected savings are modest and will not reverse systemic decline. We need investment to fully achieve the efficiency we want. Procurement is improving, but implementation capacity is not funded. You know, we have good opportunities in the lenacapavir rollout. We've got good opportunities with the TB vaccine. We have good opportunities to improve and find TB cases through the 5 million TB NTB strategy. But if we don't fund these, we actually create more risks. So ambitious targets require ambitious budgets. This MTBS does not deliver that. So lastly, in your responsibility of oversight of the government system, Parliament has a very important role. And this committee in particular, because the bulk of service delivery happens at the provincial level. You must interrogate whether the fiscal path protects health outcomes, which is a core function of provinces. Without decisive planning and investment, we need now, and at the very least, 30 billion, a bailout of 30 billion rand for the healthcare system could put us, a once-off bailout, could put us in a position to sustainably build back better, rather than by cutting, and reducing service capacity, even as the risk rise and opportunities prevail. So thank you for your consideration of our inputs, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Russell, and thanks once again to sticking to time. I'll now invite Nomangesi to represent the views of the Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition.
Morning, Chair, and to the rest of the committee. I will be presenting on behalf of the Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition alongside my colleague Nombulelo Ndabase. If you'll just allow me a second to share my screen. The presentation was shared by my colleague Nomangesi, but we will be doing the delivery. Please, can you confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kanyisa Mapipa. I work for Section 27, and I'm joined by Ms. Nombulelo Ngabase, who is a clinic committee member for the Pelani and the New Rest Clinic Committee in Komani, Eastern Cape. Thank you so much for affording us this opportunity to make these submissions on behalf of the Eastern Cape Health Crisis Coalition to the National Council of Provinces Committee on Appropriations, on the Appropriations Amendment Bill. Oops, sorry. Sorry. The Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition is a coalition of civil society organizations and individuals who advocate for better access to healthcare in the Eastern Cape. The coalition is made up of a number of health concerned organizations, including Section 27, the Treatment Action Campaign, the Rural Doctors Association, RAP, who just had the previous presentation, and several clinic committees in and around the Eastern Cape who are obviously concerned about health access in the Eastern Cape. ECAC was established in 2013 and has since worked on various issues in the province to advocate for example, for access to medicines and supplies, to advocate on issues that involve health infrastructure, human resources, sexual reproductive health services, and emergency medical services. Now, in terms of the context of the bill, as we know, the Eastern Cape, much like many other provinces in South Africa, has an issue with service delivery and the quality of the services that are delivered to the people of the Eastern Cape. And the states of the clinics, the roads, the schools, and various public facilities are quite telling of the inability of the various departments in the Eastern Cape to fulfill their constitutional mandates. This is a bigger problem that can be attributed to underinvestment in budget allocations for public services and persistent governance failures and service delivery challenges. I'll start with our recommendations, just so that they can be front and center for the committee to consider as we go through the presentation. The first recommendation is to strengthen the provincial allocations in the context of lower inflation targets. As we know that the health and education as a sector rely quite heavily on goods and services expenditure, and a downward adjustment to the inflation-linked spending in this regard would severely affect service delivery, particularly in provinces like the Eastern Cape. Our second recommendation is to increase the ring-fence infrastructure funding in the Eastern Cape. In this regard, we ask Parliament to advocate for multi-year ring-fenced allocations that prioritize the rehabilitation of facilities in Komani and across the province, with explicit reporting obligations to prevent underspending and misallocation. Our third recommendation is that the committee consider enhancing oversight over conditional grant performance. Parliament has the power and should require quarterly publicly available reports on progress delays and expenditure with consequences for repeated failure to utilize funds. This will allow and will assist Parliament to understand what is happening on the ground, as these reporting mechanisms will also allow the people who benefit from these services to report to Parliament where there's a discrepancy between the reports and what is their lived experience. The fourth recommendation is to address education backlogs with urgent targeted interventions. Here we ask that Parliament instruct the Department of Education and the Eastern Cape, the National Department of Education and the Eastern Cape Department of Education to take measurable targets for all Komani area schools. Our fifth recommendation is that Parliament should consider to ensure public protection of school nutrition protection of the school nutrition fund. Sorry, that is a typo there. That should say fund. Here we ask Parliament to strengthen the oversight over the National School Nutrition Program to prevent the reprioritization of the funds at school level. Our sixth recommendation is that to ask Parliament to stabilize the health service delivery through workforce and infrastructure support. Here we ask that Parliament recommend dedicated allocations for staff, water security solutions at clinics, and the revival of critical facilities affected by closure, including Takistan Hospital in Komani. Our seventh recommendation is that for the improvement of municipal accountability for water and waste services. Here we ask that Parliament call for conditional and performance-linked transfers to municipalities such as Enoch Ginjima and Chris Hani District Municipality. And our eighth recommendation is that Parliament would consider strengthening climate-responsive budgeting. And in this regard, we ask that Parliament request an audit of previous disaster allocations to identify failures in utilization and ensure that future allocations address both immediate recovery and long-term resilience. You will note in our presentation, we do discuss previous allocations, particularly for disaster relief, which we believe have not been put to good use in the Eastern Cape and as a result have not reached the people who are the most in need. And lastly, our last recommendation is that Parliament should consider ensuring that community participation is prioritized in budget monitoring. And like I said earlier, this will allow Parliament to note in real time discrepancies between what is reported to Parliament and what is the lived experiences of the people in South Africa. I'll move on now to the provincial equitable share. As we know, 4.6 billion has been added to the provincial equitable share following adverse impacts from updated demographic and regional GDP data in the May budget this year. We know that Free State, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the Northwest, have benefited from these adjustments. However, we note that there is an absence of an increase for this adjustment for the Eastern Cape, despite widespread evidence of service delivery collapse and the need for more investment, which we find concerning. I'll move on to conditional grants. As we know, the Eastern Cape has received 100 million in disaster-linked additions to the education infrastructure grant, which we welcome and applaud. However, we note that there is a national reduction of 342.5 million to the school infrastructure backlogs grant, which diminishes the overall resource availability, which is geared toward addressing infrastructure deficits across provinces. Although the Eastern Cape in this MTBPS is not the only province, it is not subjected to SIGB cuts. The shrink of the national envelope compromises long-term efforts to clear infrastructure backlogs. It is our submission that more money should have been allocated to the human settlements grants, and part of our presentation will focus on monies that have been allocated previously to the human settlements grant that have not quite reached the targeted beneficiaries. And we in our view, that an additional allocation to the human settlements grant would help communities recover from damaged homes where they are affected individuals since 2018. I'll move on to the provincial education grants. The Eastern Cape, alongside KZN, has received additional funding to help recover from climate events and that occurred in April and in June this year. From the additional funding, the EIG gets an adjusted allocation of 445 million, which we welcome and we applaud. However, we note that past experience has demonstrated that additional funding for school infrastructure has done very little to improve the lives of students and learners in these environments, as well as schools in the provinces. And moving on swiftly to the provincial health grant. In this MTBPS, we've seen that the Eastern Cape loses 15 million rand from the National Tertiary Service Grant. At the same time that health facilities in the province face long waiting times, water shortages, severe interruptions, severe service interruptions, and cancelled surgical procedures. The province receives 40 million rand through the health facility revitalization grant for disaster related rehabilitation. We welcome this, but we must note that in our view, it is inadequate given that there is a magnitude of infrastructure collapse and backlog in the Eastern Cape, and there's a history of underspending in the province, which directly affects the residents that live there. I will then give over to my colleague, Ms. Ngabase, who will go through the lived experiences of the people in the Eastern Cape, and quite specifically Ekomani. She will speak to the residential infrastructure, health infrastructure, schools infrastructure, as well as some of the service delivery issues that have been faced by the province. Over to you.
Thank you, Khanyisa. Good morning,
Chokozile.
everybody. Thank you, Mr. Honorable Chairperson of the session. I'm Nombulelo Ngabase.
I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for coming in between both of you. I just wanted to make you aware that you are left with 5 minutes. I'm going to request that you try and summarize your submission. All the issues that you might not be able to cover will definitely be considered because you also submitted your written presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kindly wrap up in 5
everybody.
minutes.
Let me just go straight to the residential infrastructure of Queenstown. I'm Nombulelo Ngabase, representing clinic committees and communities of Queenstown and the surroundings. In 2018, we've got a problem of floods in Queenstown because of heavy rains, but most recent one is the one that happened in 2023 February, and it began again in March 2023, where over 1,000 people were affected and they were taken to other temporary structure, which is in the picture. Those are the floods damage in the picture, and then those people were relocated to temporary structures, people from Silvertown to Pulandville and Egoli. Those are the pictures of the temporary structures that the people are living in. As you can see, the condition, it is not suitable for people to live in, and it is also high fire risk and health risk, because when weather changes, the roofs are blown away and the people are living in those conditions, which we are testing the intervention of the government to make it suitable for people to live in. Besides that, we also have a problem with school infrastructure. As you can see, that is the primary school, Louis Rex Primary School, which was totally demolished by Department of Education because of the building was old and it was health risk and injury to the learners. So after that, they were given these temporary classrooms, which are also health risk to the learners. When it is hot, your children are experiencing heat, and when it is cold, they are experiencing very cold weather, even in the classrooms, which is not proper for learners to live in. They were promised to be given a building of a new school structure, but until now, they are still using those temporary classrooms. And then there is also another school, which is Fancola Primary School. This one was banned several times, but only portion of classroom were rebuilt, not all the school, and the learners are still using those banned classrooms, which is not proper for their health as well. And academically, it is not suitable for them. And then about the toilets are not working. I'm sure it's about 4 years now since the toilets were closed. Learners are supposed to go in an open field to help themselves, to relieve themselves, which is not proper and it is not healthy as well. And the learners are at risk of anything that might happen because they're leaving the school properties to go on the open field to help themselves, to relieve themselves. That is a Pancola Primary School. And then we also have the health infrastructure. As you can see, that is the New Rest Clinic. The New Rest Clinic is just an ordinary house which has got 5 consulted rooms, but only 3 are working. The other one was affected by the rains, as you can see in the picture. And then there's also a shortage of staff there. Sometimes there are only 2 professional nurses that are working, where this clinic is accommodating about 2 to 3,000 people from the different areas. It is in Ward 13 and Ward 11. And there are no shelters for patients. Patients are staying outside, whether raining or sunny or windy. There is no shelter, whether they are kids or not. That is the picture of the New Rest Clinic. Patients are outside. There is no shelter. We've been asking from Human Settlement even for a temporary shelter, so that people at least can have some shelter to wait in. But there is nothing that is happening until now. Even the security, they don't have a safe place. Those are the people that are waiting for them to be called inside the clinic. It's so terrible for us as communities. And there is also a problem about shortage of staff and water as well. There is no water. And there are tanks that have been given by Works, but those tanks are not on the stand. They are just ornaments because they are not working. We're suffering from water now and again in all the clinics in Queenstown. That is New Rest Clinic, Pilani Clinic, Lizongana, and Parkway Clinic. There's always no water in those clinics, which is very horrible and frustrating for the clinic, as water is a basic need. And then there's also a water and waste collection problem. The municipality hasn't got enough trucks to collect the refuse from our location, in so much that you'll find that in each and every open space, they will create a dump site where people are putting their waste, because they are not collected, because the waste is not collected consistently. The municipality also complains that it has only got 3 trucks that service Mlungisi, Esbeleni, and other nearby areas. So that is also a problem to us, because we are at a health risk because of those dump areas. I think that is enough from us. Otherwise, because of time, there's a lot that they can complain about. So we are saying the government is really failing us, because there is no service delivery that we're getting from the department. Please, we ask for your intervention. Hence, we are talking to Section 27 to help us. We are pleading you, because we really say it is not yet Uhuru. And I'm thanking you.
If you may allow me to conclude, Chairperson, just this one slide. In conclusion, I beg your pardon?
I'm giving you additional 2 minutes to conclude. Please do not go beyond.
Thank you. In conclusion, although the province receives a limited upward adjustment through the disaster-related allocation in the EIG, the HFRG, and the PRMG, for this adjustment budget, these remain insufficient related to the scale of the backlogs and the lingering impact of the previous climate events that were never adequately addressed. Additionally, the province's health, education, and basic service delivery systems show a pattern of persistent underinvestment compounded by governance failures, which continue to undermine the realization of socioeconomic rights. This MTBPS does not recognize the challenges that the province faces as urgent developmental priorities. Instead, it maintains a reactive posture that allocates short-term relief without addressing the underlying structural and physical determinants of failure. Thank you for allowing the Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition to present to you today. We look forward to further engagement.
Thank you very much, Kanyisa. I see Sam and Nduduzi clapping hands. I hope members of the committee are also noting concerns raised by these stakeholders when making their presentations. Thank you very much. Let me now invite Sam and Siabulela to lead the presentation on behalf of Equal Education.
Morning, Chair. Just to note that Mafus Rafi will make the presentation together with Butsia. Thanks, Chair.
No problem. They are welcome to do so.
Greetings, Chair and honorable members. My name is Mahfouz from Equal Education, and I appreciate you giving us this chance to make this submission. I think similarly to other presenters, it's informed by the real needs of people that's where the budget is failing to meet its obligations and rights are being undermined. And so we're hoping that you take this into consideration, the urgency and the desperation of people in this country. Equal education, as you may be familiar with, is a youth-led movement, primarily of learners, but also post-school youth, parents, teachers, and community members who use mobilization and public action supported by careful research to empower young activists and ensure equality and quality in the South African education system. I think while we are going to be looking at particular items in the budgets, what ultimately does inform the submission are the conditions that learners raise in their schools, in their communities, and in various other fora with departments and with legislatures in other instances as well. And we're really here to amplify their voice so that greater consideration can be taken into government's priorities and how it funds them. So particularly we're looking at the appropriations in the Division of Revenue Adjustments Bill and the Adjustments Appropriations Bill, and we contend that some of the adjustments are insufficient to meet constitutional obligations as well as the baselines. And so we need you to exercise stronger oversight so that the budget is coherent and aligned with the law. And we're also seeking specific transparency and oversight accountability over merged conditional grants. We think it's necessary to allocate more money or ensure that frontline services are protected, and ultimately to prioritize investments that enable greater access to basic and higher education, as well as employment and training. Because without these investments, we'll continue to see poor operations and poor governance and just the weak outcomes that undermine the future of this country. Chair, I think some of our major concerns relate to the school infrastructure backlog grant and the reductions to it. It was meant to be a grant that is merged into the education infrastructure grants, but that's not what the budget documents indicate. Grade R, it's now compulsory, but it's still not funded. And this is a big issue, especially for early grade reading outcomes, but also for the right to basic education in general. And we'll also be speaking a bit about NSFAS shortfalls, operational failures, and some of the concerns we have around youth employment programs that we would like this committee to pay attention to. With that said, we do welcome some of the additions, and particularly the 2 billion rand to the ECD subsidy that makes up for some of the inflation related losses over the past 7 years, I believe. The additional funding for disaster-related funds to the education infrastructure grant. And although this was reprioritized from the school infrastructure grant, it speaks to the need of updated data and infrastructure condition assessments throughout our schools. We know that sort of the numbers currently presented by the Department of Basic Education are often outdated or inaccurate, simply because they haven't been conducting proper condition assessments. And this leaves many learners behind. We've seen pictures in the previous submission, but there's hundreds more schools that are still without access to dignified sanitation and water, and in some cases electricity as well. What I do want to mention as well is looking ahead, while there are nominal increases, this masks some of the real increases, especially when you look at per learner expenditure. Learner growth estimated, especially considering larger enrollments with compulsory grade R. But the other issue is, of course, the inflation target is now at 3%. And so with wage agreement guarantees a minimum of a 4% increase. And so while we welcome the real increases to educators, we do believe that this wage bill needs to be funded. And presently, that does not appear to be the case because there's going to be real cuts in the medium term to education. So this is a major concern because education services are under extreme pressure and provinces are under extreme pressure to meet their constitutional obligations. And ultimately, it's the immediately realizable right to basic education. And so we need to exercise strict oversight about how you're going to be protecting this fund. On the provincial equitable share, the one line item in the budget does allocate an additional 14.4 billion rand increase based on updated demographic numbers and also amounts previously allocated or provisionally allocated. But it's offset by other cuts to provinces, and so the net increase is only 4.4 billion. And when you look at it, which provinces are getting, many provinces are getting 0 rand of this 4.4 billion. And these are provinces with extreme budgetary pressures, with the really desperate populations in Popo, Mpumalanga, Northern Cape, and others. And KwaZulu-Natal, of that 4.4 billion, they're only getting 1 million. And I want to highlight this in particular because education funding in KwaZulu-Natal is under extreme pressure. They do not meet their obligations to provide schools with the norms and standards for school funding. No-fee schools are provided with, I think it's less than about 60% of what they're supposed to get. But increasingly concerningly is that they don't fund their approved wage post-establishment. So there's about 8,500, the precise numbers are in our written submission, approved posts that are currently just left vacant because the department can't afford to fund them, and an additional 2,000 where there are warm bodies in the system, but the department doesn't have money to pay their salaries, and so it's breaking up accruals. This is very concerning because what this means is that they'll incur unauthorized or irregular expenditure next year, and wasteful expenditure ultimately if they have to pay interest on the accruals that they. So it's a dire situation. And I think it could be resolved by a better allocation of the provincial equitable share that's sufficient to fund approved post-establishments and fund the right to education. On infrastructure grants, conditional grants in particular, maybe I'll first start off with the middle one, looking at the education infrastructure grant. And really the way that this grant is distributed across provinces is unfair. If you look at some of the provinces with the most needs and with a high proportion of its population in sort of rural areas, particularly Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and Limpopo, their per school allocation is far below many other provinces, right? And this doesn't make sense because it's obvious that they will need more schools because they're not densely located. There are people in rural areas. And so by underfunding this, you're really making the conditions of life that people have been living in increasingly untenable and exacerbating underdevelopment in rural areas. This later creates further pressure on urban areas where people find that they can't survive in rural areas and need to look elsewhere for survival. So it's a really bad cycle, and it's in part caused by these unjust allocations to rural provinces in particular. Must also speak about the additions to the education infrastructure grant. These are specifically for climate-related disasters. And so we welcome them, but they are to deal with certain setbacks caused by weather-related damage. And they're obviously necessary, but much more is necessary to as well address school infrastructure backlogs. Many schools do not meet the minimum norms and standards, and this additional funding won't be used for that. It's going to be used for the disasters, right? What's happening for the school infrastructure backlogs has been a cut. There's been 300 million rand reduction to the SIBG that's gone to the workbooks project. And so that 300 million rand should have actually been used. We know that although the CD and SAFE programs have sort of closed, the backlogs remain. There are hundreds of schools, and as more data comes out, updated audits, we're seeing schools still without dignified access to water, electricity, sanitation. And this urgently needs to be prioritized. We shouldn't be cutting spending on this. If it's coming out of the school infrastructure grant, then it must go to the education infrastructure grant. But the fact is that the backlogs remain, and these really need to be funded. So too does the workbox project need to be funded, but I don't think it should come at the expense of school infrastructure. I think it's very important to highlight that, and that the committee also investigate and demand greater transparency and accountability over this cut, which really jeopardizes the future of our country. I just want to touch as well on national school nutrition programs. Learners persistently complain that and schools and provinces that the money there, the costing may be incorrect because learners don't receive too little food, or they don't receive their fruit and veg for the day, or they don't receive in line with the requirements of the NSNP. And so we recommend that costing be updated. Scholar transport as well. I think it's important that as a scholar transport policy is developed, that funding be persistently considered in how these policies will be funded, and figuring out a way to ring-fence funding, because there's this severe lack of scholar transport, but also often cases of financial mismanagement or underperformance, as well as unsafe access to scholar transport. And so we need to look at that as well. And then inclusive education in particular, you'll see it's linked in our written submission. We draw on research by an institute based in Stellenbosch University, where they look at how funds for inclusive education could be used to protect posts that are particularly important to promote early grade literacy, right? Or reading outcomes in general. And we know this is particularly important because more than 80% of grade 4 learners can't read for reading in any language. And it often comes because there's insufficient screening or application of inclusive education policies. And so we recommend that Parliament ring-fence funding for these vital posts that can improve reading outcomes and improve the future of the country. Just want to stress as well that grade R is still underfunded, and this will refer to a report by the Equal Education Law Centre, persuasively argues that Parliament earlier this year breached their duty to pass a budget that funded grade R universalization. And so this mid-year adjustments process presents an opportunity for Parliament to change to adjust their budget and provide for unavoidable expenditure. Next year in January, there'll be grade R learners who will be enrolled or trying to enroll in schools, but might not find place because there's no funding for them. And so this is really important that funding be allocated to meet its constitutional obligation. Chair, I just also want to touch on potential additions to the way the budget is presented. You'll see in the written submission, there's an example from what the Gauteng Department of Education did, where they reclassified their budget and gave us a supplementary budget. And the classifications here were what's discretionary funding, what's non-discretionary funding, and they clearly identified the statutory obligations. And concerningly, many of those there wasn't sufficient funding for, right? So that would, if Parliament got access from all departments in a similar manner, then they can clearly identify where the law is being breached or what funding is particularly needed. And so we recommend that you require all departments to present budgets in a manner like this that enhances oversight. Chair, just maybe as an aside, it's small relative to the whole budget, but we do feel like value for money maybe needs to be interrogated, particularly in the shifts to fund sort of G20 related travel in the Department of Basic Education, and also the 2.2 million rand for new vehicles for the Deputy Minister. It's difficult to justify these sort of expenses in the context of severe pressure on core services. I will hand over to my colleagues here, Wulilan Petani. CI is, as I mentioned, we're a movement including post-school youth, and Siabolela is elected member of our National Council, representative from the Eastern Cape. May come in, my leader.
You have additional 5 minutes to conclude your presentation. You've already taken 15 minutes. In 5 minutes, kindly summarize. We do have a hard copy or a copy of this presentation for all issues to be taken into consideration.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair. I would like to extend my gratitude to you, Chair, and to the members of the committee, and also my colleagues and other fellow stakeholders who are here today. I would like to just touch on a few points. These are challenges that we think they are urgent and they need to be coordinated. They need a coordinated action urgently. So the first thing within the higher education and also the youth aspect of things is that the NSFAS, we know that it is facing a crisis of underfunding students and also being unable to fund all students. For an example, this year alone, it planned to fund 426,000 students. However, about 566,000 students were qualifying for NSFAS, which created a 13 billion shortfall for the year 2025-26. And we know, as we know, although the budget that is set to grow from 1.51 billion to 53.4 billion in 2026, but the challenge with this is that it lags behind the inflation and also the needs of the poor and working class students. And as equal education, we foresee a problem with this, and we also would like to indicate that there are actions that need to be taken in order to meet these needs and also these challenges. The second issue is the operational instability within NSFAS. This continues to harm students. For an example, in the University of Fort Hare, which is a university that we organize in, you see these things taking form or kind of materialize in a form of defunding or mistakes that are done by the officers because they lack capacity to do their work and also unable to offer answers to students. And another element to this, it is also the middlemen that exists between NSFAS and students, which are usually in Tele and all other people that are or companies that are usually taken by NSFAS to do their role. Yes, it helps sometimes, but it also becomes a challenge because the system must be able to deliver directly to students. And then when students have problems, they must be able to get answers directly from NSFAS. Another thing that we want to indicate is the underfunding of TVET and CET sector. We know that the universities, they often get the 60% of the higher education and training budget, whereas the TVETs are getting only the 15%. And we haven't seen any major expansion since the year 2013. And this becomes a problem because it undermines the national skills pipeline and it contradicts the National Development Plan's targets of 2.5 million TVET enrollment. And as equal education, we would like to also submit that if we aim at reducing unemployment, we have to also respond to the industry's needs and also expand the TVET colleges, both in funding and also in quality. Another issue, it is the issue of the missing middle students, which are often left behind. We know that these students, they do not qualify to get NSFAS because they meet the threshold set by NSFAS. I would like to also indicate that in 2024 alone, the government it committed to allocating 3.8 billion, of which 1.5 billion to the National Skills Fund and the 2.3 billion to the sector of education and training authorities, and this was for over 3 years, and it was to support the comprehensive student funding model, which aims to fill the gap of these missing middle students. And as equal education, we'd also like to indicate that we do welcome the funding mechanism because it aims to meet this gap. And also would like to recommend that the committee considers allocating funding that is earmarked at helping to build the requisite capacity within NSFAS and also in order for the loan scheme to function effectively. And another thing that I would like to indicate, it is the issue of accommodation, because you'd find that government says that they build accommodation for students. However, if you go to the ground, you'll see that the state of those buildings that students live in, they are not fit for humans. And this can be seen at the University of Fort Hare alone, which has been an example that is common in publicly because of the incident that was happening there. And also beyond these higher education institutions, we have the issue of unemployment. And the rate of unemployment within the South African context it is very big for the youth. And as equal education, we believe that investment in youth development, which will include entrepreneurship, soft skills, to help them match the needs of the economy, and also to diversify their skills through the digital economy. And this alone, it requires increased funding that is targeted towards basic education. And education is not the only instrument to transmit the skills for youth in order for them to be absorbed by the market. But we also need to diversify how we deal with the problem by including the skills development within our basic education through prioritization of mathematics, science, and African languages, and also digital literacy within learners at school, so that this doesn't become a phenomenon after you have completed your matric or have decided to their own job training and work experiences for young people, while strengthening the classroom experience for learners across the country. However, we are concerned that the current cohort of education and the general assistance remain contracted until the 30th of November. In line with the approved project timeline, there are no decisions that have been taken to extend or renew the initiative beyond its current phase. As confirmed by the Department of Basic Education in their official media statement on the 30th of October, there is no funding for phase 6 of the initiative by the National Treasury. and we call for the extension and the return of the initiative in 2026 and for funding to be secured in order to make all this materialize. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Siyabulela. Can I now invite Matsidiso and Duduzi to give us a presentation on behalf of Section 27? Colleagues, if I give you additional 5 minutes, kindly try to talk to your slides, not to go by word, because I do not want to come to a position where I will have to stop you in the middle of your presentation. It will not be a nice gesture. Just try and talk to the presentations if I indicate that you have 5 minutes remaining. Let me welcome Section 27.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Duduzi Kosi, and I will be presenting on behalf of Section 27 for this bill. By way of introduction, Chairperson, members of the committee, Section 27 is a public interest law center based in Johannesburg that seeks to build and help build capable working education and healthcare systems that cover all South Africans. So by that, we mean that our work centers around the rights to education and healthcare and the realization of these two fundamental rights. So, Chairperson, earlier in the May budget, we saw that this year there was a shift away from years of defunding public services, especially basic education and healthcare, with real investment returning to both sectors after years of underinvestment due to Treasury's consolidation stance. However, we note with concern that this is in danger of being short-lived with the recent introduction of the new narrower 3% inflation targeting range. While we recognize that this is a commitment to price stability, we do, however, caution that it also carries predictable consequences for ordinary people, as achieving these lower targets and staying within it would require tighter macroeconomic conditions over the medium term. We're also concerned about the impact of the new targeting regime on allocations and fiscal policy, as slower nominal growth will undoubtedly reduce tax revenues and remit resources available to invest in education, healthcare, and social protection. Alongside this, we are concerned with some elements of the new targeted accelerated responsible savings programs, or TARS, which continues to shift funds away from areas of high social need, while the government frames this program as an effort to improve efficiency. In practice, it transfers the effects of government failures into communities, as many of the programs some of the programs that are in the program that underperform in public service do so not because of lack of purpose, but because departments lack staffing, technical support, training capacity, and proper oversight. Chairperson and members of the committee, we'd like to raise the point that the new inflation targeting regime should be understood through a gendered lens as well, as government has explicitly committed itself to gender-responsive budgeting as part of the overall budget process. We would have hoped that it would have analyzed the impact of the new targeting regime on women and how microeconomic decisions affect men and women differently. We say this because it's a fact that Black women experience the highest levels of both income poverty and bear the greatest burden of both paid and unpaid care work. Yet there was no gender impact assessment done when this new target was adopted. So our point here is that gender responsive budgeting cannot be treated as separate from macroeconomic policy. Rather, it should be baked within every decision that is made on macroeconomic policy. Moving on to the provincial equitable share, Chairperson and members of the committee, we welcome the addition of 4.6 billion rands to compensate provinces that experienced significant reductions in the earlier 2025 budget. And we say that these adjustments are welcome and will undoubtedly support the delivery of basic education and healthcare services. However, it is crucial to note that this is not an increase, but rather a correction. So it's not really an expansion of real resources to provinces. We would like to note that adjustments such as this one highlight the vulnerability of provincial budgets to demographic and economic changes and the uneven effects of formula updates. Provinces like the Eastern Cape and Gauteng are not like the Eastern Cape and Gauteng, which are not meeting minimum standards for school funding, must use any additional funding they may have gotten in this cycle to fulfill this obligation. On that point, Chairperson, members of the committee, we note with concern how a number of provinces in the country over a couple of years now have been failing to adhere to minimum norms and standards for school funding. A number of these provinces, including KZN, Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and Northern Cape, have been failing to meet the legally mandated minimum standard on calendar funding for years now, with Gauteng recently cutting funding for quintile schools to below the legal standard. We note that school funding should be treated as a human rights issue as it is, and that cutting funding impacts on the quality of teaching and learning in schools. We understand though that this cuts to funding have been done to cover deficits in other line items, which for some provinces undermines the impact of fiscal policy towards improving quality education for all. Moving on to education infrastructure funding, we welcome the significant increase to the EIG, the Education Infrastructure Grant of 554 million in the adjustment cycle, with 100 million going to the Eastern Cape and a further 354 million going to KZN to help those provinces recover and fix schools that were damaged by the recent storms and other climate events. However, Chairperson and members of the committee would like to note that this is not how we should be going about funding infrastructure for schools. South Africa cannot continue on this trend of patching schools after every storm. What we need is a more robust, long-term, climate-resilient education infrastructure strategy, one that plans ahead, strengthens durability of school buildings, and makes them much more resilient to climate events, and ensures that maintenance is funded and carried out before buildings collapse. On the school infrastructure backlogs grant, like the other presenters before us, we lament the cut to the grant of around 342 million. It appears these funds are being redirected to other parts of the DBE budget, namely the workbooks program and infrastructure assessments. While these two are very important items that the department should be spending money on, we take issue with the money being moved from SIPG. We would have preferred if the money came from the contingency emergency reserves, which have been replenished in the adjustment cycle. We note that the SIPG tends to be a casualty of reductions and reprioritizations due to its historical underperformance. And we say that it should be noted that despite the cuts over the years, the need for safe and adequate school infrastructure is still there, and cutting these grants will undoubtedly take us back. On healthcare adjustments in this budget, Chairperson and members of the committee, we see that the healthcare facilities revitalization grant receives a welcomed adjustment of upward adjustment of 93 million, with 40 million going to the Eastern Cape, and the rest, remaining amount goes to the Western Cape. As with education, funding and the adjustment, much of this funding, all of it actually goes towards disaster relief and repairing clinics and hospitals that were damaged by storms and extreme weather events. With this in mind, we note that this grant, the Healthcare Facilities Revitalization Grant, sits at the center of a long-running problem. The grant itself has been subject to repeated nominal cuts in previous years because some provinces have been struggling to spend parts of it. And we call on Parliament to help with this issue by ensuring that provinces provide clear timelines, transparent reporting, and stricter accountability measures for this additional amount to make sure that it is used in a proper way. Moving on to funding for tertiary healthcare services, we see that the National Tertiary Services Grant receives a mixed and deeply troubling picture in this adjustment cycle, with the Western Cape getting an additional 40 million, reflecting stronger provincial planning system and a capacity to spend there. However, two provinces with some of the highest clinical need in the country are receiving reductions, which are the Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape, 15 million and 25 million in reductions respectively. Would like to note that these cuts are not happening in a low demand environment. They're in fact happening against a backdrop of backlogs in oncology services, which have become severe in provinces like the Eastern Cape, where there's been forced rotation for chemotherapy services for pediatric cancer patients, and there are delays in life-saving treatments for children simply because the province is unable to deliver. Moving on to our recommendations for this bill, Chairperson and members of the committee. Firstly, we'd like to reiterate our call from earlier submissions for human rights impact assessments to be part of the budget process, especially with the introduction of TARS and the new inflation target. Parliament should require that there be transparent assessments to assess the distributional, gendered, and socio-economic impacts of the new inflation target before its full implementation over the MTF. Secondly, we'd like to reiterate another call we've made in the past, which is for gender-responsive budgeting to be made to include the departments of health and education, as these are sites as priority sites of implementation. This is because these departments employ a large number of women and provide essential public services that are relied on by many women and girls and carry major implications for unpaid care work. It is within this context that we call for Parliament to require the next phase of the GRB pilot project to explicitly incorporate education and healthcare with clear reporting guidelines on the gendered impacts and distributional outcomes. On provincial spending, Chairperson, we call on Parliament to ensure that provinces that are receiving upward adjustments in this cycle prioritize using this money to fill critical health and education posts, which there are quite a number in some provinces, and to help stabilize school operations and meet minimum norms and standards for Pell funding. We call on Parliament to require provinces that are non-compliant to this and to submit remedial action plans within 3 months. This committee should also urgently intervene in provinces that are already not meeting the minimum funding thresholds for school funding. Provincial education departments should be required to ring-fence school operation budgets and publish annual compliance reports. On to the next recommendation, while we welcome the infrastructure disaster recovery funding, we again like to raise that infrastructure delivery in the country remains reactive and fragmented, that Parliament should call for a national strategy highlighting how high-risk schools and healthcare facilities will be prioritized in the educational allocation, and how maintenance backlogs that already existed before this period will be addressed, and how climate resilience will be built into future planning. We are concerned with the 342 million adds to the SIBG, and we say that this should be accompanied by a clear and transparent plan explaining how the constitutional obligation to eradicate unsafe school infrastructure will be met in light of the reduction to the SIBG. And we say that Parliament should require DBE to submit a turnaround plan with clear project timelines, procurement reforms, and performance monitoring mechanisms. We also call on Parliament to require provinces receiving disaster recovery allocations to publish progress reports, including procurement steps, anticipated timelines, and reasons for delays, if there are any. The Eastern Cape and Western Cape, we should be, to this end, be supported with targeted technical assistance to eliminate some of the long-standing infrastructure backlogs that we see there. We again call on Parliament to probe this issue of cuts to provinces with clinical need in terms of tertiary services, healthcare services funding. Parliament must demand a coordinated plan that includes oncology capacity, support, reliable equipment maintenance, strengthened procurement units, and national provincial technical task schemes to help provinces spend funds for tertiary healthcare services better. That is it from myself for the Section 27 chairperson. We look forward to further engagements, and thank you for affording us the opportunity to present on the bill.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'd now like to invite Youth Capital Clotilde to lead the presentation.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, just to say that so my name is Clotilde, and I'm part of the Youth Capital campaign. And for today, I'm not here alone. I'm presenting with Gabo Lekodi and Colin Africa, who are my colleagues as facilitators at Youth Capital. So for those of you, oh, sorry, let me just start my timer so that I respect time. For those of you who don't know Youth Capital, we are a national campaign, and we evidence-based and youth-centered. We shine a light on the roadblocks that hold young people back from meaningful economic participation. And we were born out of three considerations: that the solutions to youth unemployment are not effective. There's no common vision to tackle the issue, and young people's lived experiences are often not represented, are not part of the discussion. Sorry, I just need to... So this, we're going to try and be brief today, but we just wanted to set some context for our written submission. So we know that unemployment, we've seen the spike in unemployment. We've seen the 42.2% is the expanded unemployment in South Africa. When we zoom into young people, we know that 6 in 10 young people between the ages of 15 and 25 are unemployed, and 4 in 10 between the ages of 25 and 34. So overall, we know that young people's positionality, they're very vulnerable in the market, in the labor market, and 5 in 10 young people are not in education, employment, or training. And this is a crisis, and it's been like this for at least a decade. I wanted to kind of give an overview of, Stats SA brought out new unemployment stats, or with the quarterly labor force survey, they combine the rate of unemployment with the potential labor force. So, and this is a provincial breakdown, and we've seen that in provinces like the Eastern Cape, 50.2% is the combined rate of unemployment and potential rate of labor force. We know that young people are willing and ready to work, but often the opportunities are not there. So if you look at the number of applications for the Basic Education Employment Initiative, which is also the program that our colleagues at Equal Education mentioned, 1.9 million young people applied for 200,000 positions. The absorption in the market, we've seen it stagnant, with less than 10% of people are looking for work that then are absorbed. And we've seen that the 80,000 jobs were lost in the second quarter of 2025. And year on year, we've actually seen a decrease in employment creation of 2.1%. Research at Youth Capital, building on the Siaka study at UJ, seen that the average cost of looking for work is 1,400 Rand. And for today, we just also wanted to kind of give you insight as we're running a new wave of like a new survey. When we ask young people what are the biggest barriers to look for work, what is mentioned is also the lack of jobs in the area. And as part of our submission, there in this context, there's no funding that has been allocated for the presidential employment stimulus to run in 2026. So we just wanted to kind of quickly give an insight of what have been the multipliers of the presidential employment stimulus. As we know, it's a set of interventions, and the presidential employment stimulus program supported quite a number of projects and promoted creation of jobs. And it's also benefited with spillover effects going into the broader economy. So we've seen catering, transport, and printing as some of the sectors that have benefited. We know that there's a reading crisis in South Africa, and our colleagues from Equal Education also pointed it out. And we know that 80% of grade 4 learners can't read or write for meanings. And there's been a decline that has affected northern provincial provinces more than coastal ones. We've seen that having reading champions or curriculum assistants in classrooms has benefited with the recognition of letters, which is a foundation of literacy. And we've seen like in a very positive proportion of learners that meet the benchmark for the end of grade 1. And then also, if we look at the Social Employment Fund, this is an independent evaluation, and the social work, the meaningful impact of social value has been measured across a variety of indicators. So like really bringing up the fact that there's outcomes beyond employment that are being achieved here. So before I hand over to my colleagues, like really summarize recommendations is that we really need to consolidate and extend the presidential employment stimulus. We've seen the impact, especially in the current context of stagnant economic growth, and also the impact we've seen that research shows that even when economic growth happens, jobs for young people are not automatically created. So we need to be a lot more intentional. We also need to understand the impact of fiscal consolidation of young people. We also need to look at public employment programs as an integrated solution for social protection. And also something that has come up quite a lot in the last 2 years is that we really need to look at the findings from the GTAC analysis of active labor market programs, because these are findings that the National Treasury has mentioned for some of the decreasing budgets. And then I just want to hand over to Khabo and Colin, because in the spirit of today's presentations by our colleagues, it's also important to look at these numbers, not just as numbers or stats, but in the lived realities of young people. So Colin and Khabo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chloe. My name is Colin Africa, and I'm also as a young person representing Youth Capital on the ground, which we are youth community facilitators, which we are on the ground and actually see the struggles that currently unemployed youth are facing. So one of the factors that I'm going to mention now is to say that the political involvement when it ever comes to the recruiting processes of unemployment of unemployed youth, is that, for instance, whenever there's vacancies that have been advertised, politics are always involved there, and it's now stopping the procedures to go according to plan. Because now I saw that most of the politics that are involved in recruitment processes are now with their own gain. Maybe like recruiting family members are also seeking seeking contracts out of the employment system that is supposed to go for employment of young people. So now this is also now pushing young people away from practicing their democratic right by voting. So being approaching the local elections, this is also one big factor now that young people will feel like they're not going to be part of this local elections because of these factors, now leading to them not getting employment because of involvement of political members in recruitment processes, where we know not all of them are going to be categorized under this thing that I'm not now mentioning, but there are some members of politics that are currently now, how can I say, stimulating to this factor of not getting young people employment. Yeah, so this is one of the biggest factors that we see as I am seeing as a young person on the ground on a daily basis in my community. Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity again. I will give over to Cabo now, to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colin, Chair and colleagues. My name is Kgaule Godi from Limpopo Province in South Africa. I will be touching bases on how resources are also a barrier to young people to actually access information and also jobs. A lot of young people from my community, the rural community, they go extra miles to actually access resources, access job opportunities, and it always becomes a challenge for them to actually be out there in this space and also express themselves. And I would also like to touch that as a youth capital facilitator on the ground, I've seen how the arts have impacted a lot of young people, especially in terms of like literacy, accessing opportunities. And we've also been a receiver of the funding from PEPS with Sunshine Cinema. And I've seen how film has connected communities. I've seen how film has, created job opportunities for others, and also created literacy for the young people in our communities. And then we'd really love to have like such opportunities, extended to rural communities, and not just opportunities that are short limited, like they offer 6 months and then after 6 months they are gone, and then leaving young people with little experience. And at schools, like we have seen like so much impact with, especially with the after school programs, on how young people are finding interest to actually go beyond classroom and also participate in activities that are really impacting them, and also accessing resources. Like I said, I operate in a community where we don't have a library. So for me, or for young people in my community to actually get to library, they have to go to town, which is a taxi, which is money, and also access to data. For them to actually find a Wi-Fi spot, they have to catch a taxi to maybe our hospital, be behind like those buildings, access data to actually be able to apply for such opportunities. So as youth capital, we're really advocating for youth participation and also youth involvement in these instances, and also for young people to actually get access to opportunities. I would like to pass over to my colleague Glo to conclude for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kabo and Colin and honorable members. I think in conclusion, we've seen that youth unemployment and the number of NEET and underemployment pose a direct threat to social cohesion, social justice, and inclusive economic development. So we really pledge to this committee, you have the authority and responsibility to ensure that decisions that are made in the budget are reflected in and can benefit the lived experiences of young people. And this requires a shift, looking at investing in youth transitions, public employment, and social protection to really ensure that young people in South Africa can be everything they want to be. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Youth Capital. The last stakeholder to make a presentation before the committee will be COSATU Comrade Matthew. You are invited to make a presentation.
Okay, morning, Chair, morning, members. Thanks for giving us a space to do so. Just put it quickly on the presentation, Chair. Just once. Okay. No, thanks very much, Chair, members. I think it's been a long year for all members. I'm sure members are looking forward to wrapping up this year. Yeah, I think first, starting with on a foundation level, I think we do appreciate there has been critical and impressive turnarounds in many key parts of the state over the past year, the past 2-3 years. We've seen that we've overcome load shedding. We've seen the stabilization of Transnet, the reopening of metro rail lines, the rebuilding of SARS. We've exited grey listing. We've seen the rating upgrades by Standard & Poor's and by Moody's. We've seen 250,000 jobs in the last quarter. So those are real achievements, Chair, especially given where we've come from the previous decade. And of course, some of these things must still filter down into the economy. And of course, yesterday we saw 0.5% growth in the last quarter, and I guess year on year about 1.2%. So there is some green shoots we can slowly see, not enough. I think, Chair, our frustration with the MTBS and the DORA and the adjustments, appropriation bills, that we just don't feel we're moving fast enough to really get us out of the 1% growth where we've been stuck at for 2 decades, nor really we feel to give hope to 12 million people who are unemployed. But we do appreciate, Chair, that we're not dealing with a new budget, but rather a medium-term budget statement and adjustments. So in DORA, adjustments to a provincial local government, largely around infrastructure damaged by natural disasters. But I think, Chair, there is some important interventions around stabilizing and improving local government. So this is something a select committee has been, I think we've been discussing for quite a few years. And we do want to welcome some of these adjustments as being useful to rebuild public services, infrastructure, and hopefully fix local government. And I think there is some positive adjustments to public employment stimulus as well. I think, from looking at DORA, there is useful allocations, 454 million rand for schools damaged by natural disasters in the Eastern Cape and KZN. There's about 342 million for infrastructure backlogs. We're a little bit concerned about this because there's a bit of environment shifting from infrastructure backlogs to workbooks, projects, and infrastructure planning, but hopefully there's a logical rationale for it. 150 million for road repairs in the Eastern Cape, 303 million, which is a bit of a rollover for public transport in eThekwini. But even that, Chair, whilst one is never thrilled by rollovers, I think we can look back 3, 4, 5 years. The amount of rollovers in the budget, I think, has decreased significantly. So this is the only rollover we could see in this NTBS. So that in itself does indicate a bit of tightening of fiscal management. So I think on the health front, there's some useful allocations for the NHI indirect grant to the Free State and Limpopo, facilities, revitalization in the Eastern Cape and Western Cape. There's allocations for the building of the 2 hospitals in the Western Cape and 1 in Limpopo and 2 clinics in the Free State. But we must raise concern, Chair, that Klipfontein Regional Hospital in the Western Cape, that is meant to replace GF Jooste in Manenberg. That's been a project, I think, almost 2 decades now. So we're hoping that these allocations indicate we are beginning to kind of move speed on these kind of delays. I think maybe perhaps one of the most useful things is this urban development financing grant for trading services for the metros. We hope that's going to try to help fix basic services, electricity, water, for the metros, help ensure they collect revenue due to them. That can begin to be about putting in place a sustainable path for our cities. And again, Chair, there's useful, about 500 million rand for local government repairs, infrastructure repairs, in 3 districts in the Eastern Cape, Amatole, Owatambo, and Alfred and Zove. So hopefully also to kind of help repair that damage there. we were pleasantly surprised by the 450 million rand to boost the public employment stimulus, or the presidential employment stimulus, in the metros. We would obviously have hoped for much greater, just given the level of unemployment. We think the presidential employment stimulus chair has been quite a positive intervention, where it pays workers a minimum wage, so not paying below it. We were providing, real experience and skills and confidence, and hopefully then equipping the participants to find, longer term employment once they exit it. So I think it's something we think we should really be seeing how do you expand it, by tapping to the fiscus, but also to the developmental finance institutions, the private banks, investment funds. Collectively, how can we begin to really expand these public and even private employment programs? There is useful allocations for electricity transmission, 2 billion for Polokwane water infrastructure would be quite helpful. There's a pilot project in Mpumalanga for restoring or fixing water and electricity services in some municipalities. But just again, Chair, the level of dysfunctionality amongst many municipalities, especially the Northwest Free State, Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, we think it requires a much greater sense of action. And also, we must really begin to crack the whip on municipal managers who just continuously fail to pay staff. Quite a few fail to pay pension funds and obviously fail to maintain infrastructure or provide basic services. And Chair, I think we'd seen the announcement, I think by about 2-3 weeks ago, by the AG about doing that, issuing a certificate of debt to the municipal manager Nakamodiri. And we think those kind of cracking the whip will begin to install a sense of discipline amongst municipal managers. But Chair, I think we must be alarmed. If we see municipal debt owed to Eskom increasing by 20 billion rand a year, similar alarm bells reaching for municipal debt owed to water boards, that's something that we should really be placing the center of the intervention package by government. But to be fair to local government, Chair, if they have debt owed to municipalities by residents, businesses, even government departments of 300 billion rand, then there's a systemic crisis here where we need to really actively intervene on. So, Chair, there is a program to capacitate about 140 municipalities. We should need to get more feedback on it and really see how do you expedite it. And obviously, it's not possible to place all of these delinquents under administration. That's not just physically possible, but we need to see greater action. And whatever metrics you take, Chair, the fact that about 70 municipalities are in financial trouble should give all of us sleepless nights. But this is just for information for members' sake. These are the current municipalities that we have picked up who are in arrears with regards to staff salaries. Many of them, Chair, you would know off by heart, like Naledi, Tsopotla, Tembelihle, the Northwest, Northern Cape, Enoch and Gujima in the Eastern Cape. Free State is a champion of dysfunctional municipalities in many instances, Kopanong, Mafubi, etc. It fluctuates, Chair, but this is better than before. This is about a dozen. I think about 2 years ago, it was about 36 municipalities were in arrears around salary. So one can hope that this could be an indication of some progress as well. But I think a proposal really around local government is to kind of support the interventions. We do need to move municipalities towards prepaid electricity meters. Let's hope the trading services interventions will yield long-term results. But there is a further need for interventions to help municipalities ensure they're able to collect the rates and revenue owed to them. We think we need to have an expansion of the capacitation program for these municipalities, and hopefully, Chair, the white paper, which I think will be submitted to Cabinet by March, would hopefully provide light or path rather to a new municipal funding model, which hopefully will give us a longer-term solution. Just on the adjustments appropriation bill, I think there is some positive allocations. The 356 million for the CAP program, 860 million for land reform. Good news from around the Bella Act, 2.7 billion rand, rolling out the early childhood development. On defense, 1.8 billion, which we hope begins to stabilize to repair the damage done to FNDF over years. We're seeing, about 700 million rand for primary healthcare and facilities revitalization. I think some positive news, Chair, about just under 3 billion rand towards capacitating home affairs, hopefully ending the queues. Just under 1 billion rand for informal settlements upgrading, the allocations for DERCO for G20, and of course 2 billion for SCD grants. We also think that's going to give some relief to the poor. There's about 600 million rand for courts. We hope is going to help modernize the system there and some of the delays. And of course, 1.4 billion for disaster for local government, the 2 billion for urban development financing grant, the trading systems. And Chair, of course, I think for all members, at least we're now beginning to see some work rebuilding Parliament. And there's also some allocations for the police for administration. Hopefully that can address some of the challenges there. There are a few areas of concern just getting towards the end. Under communication and digital technology, so there's a good allocation of just under R1 billion for infrastructure, but we must really raise concerns about the state of the post office, the post bank. We're hoping with the minister's announcements that we'll begin in the new year to see a coherent turnaround plan, but what we've seen by the business rescue practitioners hasn't given us comfort. We're disappointed, Chair, to see 40 million rand cuts to the inspectorate program of the Department of Labour. And this comes against a backlog of workers' rights continuously being violated. And again, there was no additional allocations to help reinforce the CCMA, which really is struggling to cope with the amount of cases they have. A 3 billion rand cut from Kumazi Water Project, but no indication of what we hope would be revised timelines. And then, Chair, we've seen many companies struggling this year because of the high price of electricity, be it the smelters, be it in the agricultural manufacturing sectors, the impact of US duties on South African exports. The Minister for DTIC and DERECO made an announcement in August. There'll be a support package for these struggling companies, but we've not seen that. There is a small additional allocation for DTIC, but that's largely for administration. Nothing that's really going to help reach struggling companies and workers. Similarly, Chair, there's a bit concerning there were some cuts to road maintenance, about 4 billion. And we had really hoped for additional support for Transnet, for Metro Rail, just given the importance to unlocking economic growth. But Chair, just kind of wrapping up, we hope that in the budget in February, we'll see a much more aggressive approach. We'll move away from what we think austerity budget cuts and really prioritize frontline services. We'd hope that we'll see the SOD grant being raised over the MTEF to the food poverty line, that we would see the frontline vacancies of nurses or teachers, police, doctors being filled. And I think critically, Chair, for two critical things for us, we need to, if we are to get out of this 1% economic growth cul-de-sac, is to have a new mass industrial SMME, as well as public or presidential employment stimulus program. It can't just be from the fiscus. The fiscus got constraints, but it should include support from the DFIs, from the banks, from the investment funds, the private sector. How do we do a bit of coordination to complement each other? But if we want to get out of this 1% growth, we've got to have a much more aggressive approach to stimulating the economy and just creating a path to the labour market for unemployed persons. But Chair, just in conclusion, there are positive parts in the daughter bill and the adjustments bill that we had pushed for as COSATU. But I think fundamentally we're distressed. We're not moving with sufficient speed. We're not allocating sufficient resources to really capacitate the state to provide the public or municipal service society needs, or that will take us to the 3% growth necessary to tackle unemployment. So we really do hope, Chair, in February we have a much more aggressive approach that can begin to build upon some of the green shoots and really get us to the 2%, the 3% economic growth that fundamentally is what we need to get us out of this unemployment and growth crisis. So, Chair, and hopefully I stuck to the timeframes, and thanks to Chair members for giving us space. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Matthew. And colleagues, I must further bring to the attention of the committee that the committee needs to note a written submission by Breadline Africa. They will not be presenting before the committee this morning. Thank you very much to all the stakeholders that made presentations before this committee. Like I said from the beginning of the meeting, that your submission strengthens oversight work of this committee. And it also helps us ensure that the budget decisions reflect the realities and the experiences that are experienced by the communities. I'm now going to note hands of members that would like to engage on the presentations by the stakeholders. I see Honorable Ryder, Honorable Siwisa, Honorable Ndlovu, Honorable Majola, Honorable Brits, Honorable Swart will be the last. In that order, colleagues, starting with Honorable Ryder.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning to you, to colleagues, and to all of the presenters. civil society mostly, and we do appreciate your inputs. Yeah, and just on that, Chairperson, I think it's important to note that certainly the inputs from stakeholders, private individuals, if only they would come from business and from civil society, enriches our discussions and helps inform us ahead of our taking this particular bill to our provinces at the end of the week. So thank you. You've given us a lot to think about, and whether we agree or disagree, it just means that you've enriched the conversation. We do appreciate it. Chair, I'm going to go through. There were quite a few submissions, and I'm not going to take too long on any one of them, but I do think each of them I have a comment on. So let's start with Amandla Moby. I think we continue to disagree on the health promotions levy. I think it's unfortunate to single members of the committee out. I do think that the position I take is not entirely my position alone, but was supported by the majority of the previous committee in the previous parliament. And it's important to position that, Chairperson. And there's a comment that came from Youth Capital. So I'm taking Youth Capital out of order, but out of the order of presentation. I'm not calling them out of order. But Youth Capital made a very important comment and said, don't look at stats alone, but rather look at the lived reality. And that's exactly what happened when members of the committee went and had a look at the lived reality on the ground and the impact of the sugar tax on producers in KZN specifically. So I do think that it's important that we do take the health issues into account when we look at the health promotions levy. I do, however, still maintain my position that you need to balance that with the impact of taxation that it has on other people, and ensure that you have a measured approach. And I do think that we are getting to a point where the actual impact of the health promotions levy is being seen a little bit better now. I don't agree with all of the research, but then again, I'm not the expert here. I receive inputs. I don't agree with all of the input that we've seen, because there is, for each study, there's one study that finds something different. But I do agree that the impact is being seen. But until such time as we can ring fence the taxation on the health promotions levy and apply it into the health system, I'm not sure that it's going to be effective or as useful as seen. Budget Justice Coalition, yeah, I think highlighted the cuts to the frontline posts, which I think concerns all of us. And Kasatu, as always, spoke about, although they didn't use their normal term, millionaire managers, but the fact is that it remains a concern that frontline posts are being cut in order to preserve the positions of millionaire managers, which is not what the system is designed for if we wanted to work optimally. I do want to just respond to the issue around Budget Justice's comments on TARS. And I think it is disingenuous, as far as, maybe that's not the right word, and I apologize. Let me withdraw the word disingenuous. But I think it might be a little superficial to on the one hand, berate state capture and the massive misuse of funds that was done structurally through state capture, and then not acknowledge that some sort of a review of spending pattern needs to take place. TARS is essentially an attempt to unwind and unroll many of the impacts of state capture. And so I do think that TARS needs far more support than it gets. People just throw their hands in the air and yell budget cuts, budget cuts. But I think it is a case of we need to have a look at what money is being spent on. And I'll touch more on that later when we get to NSFAS. But I do think we need to give TARS a chance to help us to unwind that lost decade of state capture So I'm asking BJC, be a little less critical on task, give it a chance to do its work, and yes, where it's cutting for the sake of cutting, I think that's not appropriate. But where it's cutting wasteful expenditure that doesn't meet the needs of South Africans, I think it should be supported. Rural health, I thought, was a well thought out presentation. Again, some points for debate and different positions. But I really thought it was a well constructed presentation. Thank you for that. And yeah, maybe that's a chance to say, even without the IT capabilities, although I'm sure Wits has got IT capabilities they could have supported you with, but I do think that putting your best foot forward on this platform is extremely useful to us as members. Eastern Cape health crisis. Now, I'm going to point out something here that doesn't necessarily talk to the presentation, but talks to a discussion that we had in this committee recently. In fact, in the joint committee when we were discussing the fiscal framework. And again, it relates to clarity as to who is presenting to us. And it was interesting for me that the Eastern Cape health crisis presentation was delivered by someone who proudly had Section 27's branding on their name. Now, again, this talks to the fact that we actually need to get some form of disclosure as to who is presenting to us and who they represent. And it was something that was put forward by one of the presenters in the fiscal framework and supported by me. It's been discussed in the past as well. And I think it is important because Section 27 had a later chance. And, it's a case of creating an image or a perception of volume of positions, where in fact it's the same organizations, just wearing different caps presenting to us. So I don't want to undermine the content of Eastern Cape Health Crisis's presentation. And in fact, I think it was useful that the presenter actually indicated on her name that she is also from Section 27. That is extremely helpful. And I think that's what we're calling for, is transparency in terms of who is being represented when they're presenting. So I'm using it as an example, but it's probably the example of this is how it should be done, rather than castigating them. Equal education, very well thought through presentation and some good matters for discussion. I want to pick out the issues around NSFAS, purely for time to limit me. So I do think that the full review of NSFAS needs to be done to ensure that the funds are actually reaching the intended recipients. And this is important. And this goes back to state capture, because we've seen NSFAS was used as a funding scheme for connected people. And the presenter brought out the issue of housing. And housing is one of the key issues. This whole piggy bank of housing for students has been absolutely abused by so many players. And you spoke about it around Fort Hare. I can tell you, your experience might be in Fort Hare, but in my space, in my constituency, the situation is as bad in Mfuleni, in places like Bedworth Park, where people are getting funding, hidden funding, by the way, that doesn't come out of NSFAS, hidden funding that comes out of development propellers and all sorts of funding, DFI institutions. People are getting funding to put up substandard student accommodation, to shove as many people as they possibly can, shove into these places without the correct planning, town planning, etc., disrupting the entire neighborhood, but leaving the students in substandard accommodation, not paying their rates and taxes, which is something that, again, Kasato highlighted earlier on, not paying their rates and taxes, and actually being a massive draw on the system, because they are shoving in too many people, and more people than the infrastructure can maintain, the sewage and the water and the electricity infrastructure can manage. And so you end up with illegal connections, etc., etc. So I do think NSFAS is something that needs massive looking into. Section 27 spoke about the school infrastructure backlog grant and the fact that it was losing funding. Now, I do want to point out the Minister of Basic Education has confirmed that 98% of pit toilets are eradicated, but that's not the only issue that we have with school infrastructure backlog. There are many infrastructural issues that we have. And again, I think that this is a point that I made last year, is that the collapsing of the school infrastructure backlog grant into the schools grant is a very dangerous thing, because it means that it's going to remove our ability to focus on how much money is actually being spent on dealing with these backlogs. And the inability to spend the money, the fact that we're seeing money taken away in this adjustment budget, indicates that provinces don't have the capacity or are not focusing on addressing these backlogs. And it's something that we should be seized with, particularly as members of the NCOP. So this is exactly the type of thing that should be sparking questions for us as NCOP members, and raising our concerns. I know there's a very big move, and I've been personally asked, approached to support the fact that we collapse this grant into the bigger grant with compelling arguments. Again, I maintain my position that it's going to lose focus. Youth Capital, I think I've touched on briefly earlier on. Kasatu, as always, good presentation, well thought out. Slight differences of opinion, but you also didn't comment that Midvaal local municipality received their 12th consecutive clean audit yesterday, which is something to be commended. But I do think those concerns about municipal funding and the fact that government departments are one of the hindrances and the handbrakes on municipalities to fund their operations is really important. But good presentations all around. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Ryder. Honorable Sibisa.
No, thank you, Chair. Greetings to everyone. I hope I'm audible, Chair. Chair, I've got only 2 or 3 comments and questions that I need to put forward. The first one will be to the BJC. As you are standing, South Africa is heavily relying on imports of products, especially products that can easily be produced within the country itself. Chairperson, I was surprised when I was doing some research and I found out that there's even onion and peppers that are being imported in South Africa, which is of a great concern, Chair, because each and every household where you'd go, you'll find grandmothers planting onions and green peppers. And yet we've got South Africa that's also important, that chicken breeding is on the growth, Chair, in South Africa. Everybody is getting into the industry of chicken breeding in South Africa because they see that that's where they can make money, especially the rural women, even in townships, is becoming a norm. But there is slow response to assist farmers, especially black farmers, when there are disasters. There is a persistent underspending in agriculture support grant that affects food security. Now to BJC, how can Parliament assist to address this underspending in agriculture, especially to ensure that we support our farmers in South Africa, especially the upcoming farmers that can actually give us the most basic food like your onions and peppers and your chickens? How can Parliament assist in addressing this? To COSATU, the country does not have enough frontline workers, especially in the healthcare and education. And I'm going to make an example. Previously, I think 2 weeks back, we went on an oversight, the provincial week oversight. We went to a municipality called Karia-Wagland in Namakwa. When you got there, one of the issues that were raised by the residents is that they don't have a doctor. And it's of a great concern if you go to a municipality and they tell you that they do not have a government doctor, which means that some of the people that do not have money to actually go to a private doctor are going to be stuck. They'll have to rely on nurses that do not even have, some of them don't have the authority to champion for certain things or to prescribe for certain things. So what proposed finding is required to stabilize the frontline staffing with reference to the 2 fields, education and the health department. And then I'm going to go to Colin. I saw that he's from Postman Bank. I think I forgot that the stakeholders that he was presenting under. I want to check with Colin. There is a high rate of unemployment, especially in the Northern Cape. Postman's Bank itself is surrounded by mining industries in there. How do you think can Parliament actually partner with the mining industry to address the issue of unemployment amongst the youth, especially for youth that do not have the qualifications to actually go into the deeper part of mining industry? Equal education, I fully agree with you on the issue of accommodation. The issue of student accommodation is a burning issue, Chair. You find that because NSFAS takes longer to pay the money, the students have to go and look for alternative accommodation, which is unsafe, which is exploitatory, whereby if some of these students cannot pay, the landlords look for sexual favors. Some of them are being exploited, whether it's a boy, it's a girl child or a boy child, they are being exploited. Some of them are paying more than what they're supposed to be paying because of they do not have the funds for NSFAS because of the long process that it takes for NSFAS to be processed for those students to get money to be able to pay for their accommodation. Some of them find themselves having to rely on what we call sugar daddies and sugar mummies for them to survive far away from home. So I fully agree with the issue of the student accommodation. The issue that preference is given to universities than to TVETs. And Chair, I'm a product of from a college. And what the government is doing now to give preference more to universities than colleges, it's also of a great concern. I also agree with them on that, to say that we need to look into those issues, especially the issue of NSFAS when it comes to students, especially the issue of student accommodation. It's a burning issue because some of these students, if they do not get accommodation, they end up packing their bags and going home. And I would like to say to Equal Education, they must keep on being vocal, especially for the underprivileged students in South Africa, to ensure that they get what they need. And I hope that one day they'll write a paper or make a presentation to the Minister of Higher Education so that he must understand the difficulties that are being faced by students out there. I hope at some point they will try to engage the Minister of Higher Education. I think those were my only four concerns, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Sibisa. Honorable Ndlovu.
Greetings to yourself, Honorable Chairperson. I just wanted to show my face, and can I request you to allow me to switch off my video because there's
Yes.
a noise. Thank you.
Yes, proceed, Honorable Ndlovu.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, let me welcome the presentation from our stakeholders, the 8 of them, with the submission from the Breadline Africa. I've got some few questions from my side, Chair. On the Breadline Africa, the Breadline Africa raises concern about the insufficient ECD infrastructure funding, weak integration of ECD into municipal planning, compliance barriers, red tape, and performance weaknesses within education infrastructure grant. Chair, what I will want to check on page 4, which regulatory requirements create the longest delays in ECD approval processes, and how should the executive consider streamlining this? That's number 1 on the Breadline Africa. 2 is the one of what indicators should the Parliament adopt to strengthen accountability in quarterly reporting of the ECD and school infrastructure performance. That is on page 5 of the submission, the written submission by the Breadline Africa. The Budget Justice Coalition, Chair, it talks of it warns that the fiscal stance risks worsening inequality, undermining conditional grant, which also reducing the provincial equitable shares adequacy and weakening health, education, and social protection system. My question, Chair, is on the how should the Parliament respond to the PES allocation that rely on contested demographic data from census, which is the page 4 of the presentation. And on the page 7, what accountability model should replace in year withholding of conditional grants when provinces underspend? That is my other question, Chair. If I allow me to go to the COSATU community map, there is COSATU raises concern about the consolidation harming employment, insufficient social protection, collapsing municipalities, and transport and energy infrastructure failures. My question is, what oversight should strengthen? What oversight tools should strengthen municipal financial sustainability, especially in salary and ESCOM debt distressed municipality? The what reform, that's the second question that I put to COSATU. What reform should enhance SARS capacity to reach a 75% compliance target, which is in page 9? The youth capital. Youth capital highlights rising NEET levels, inadequate budget aligns with youth outcomes, and proven value of public employment programs and barriers to labor market transition. The only question that I have to the youth capital, Chair, is how should Parliament enforce budget alignment with gain commitment on youth employment? My last question, Chair, is on the equal education, that is basic education infrastructure and higher education. The equal education highlights a real reduction in pre-learner spending, weak infrastructure budget, scholar transport failures, inclusive education, personnel shortage, NSFAS instability, and youth employment vulnerables. The question that I have is what on page 13 and 14 on their slides, what government and ICT reform are needed to stabilize NSFAS and ensure timely student support. My last one is how can Parliament assist to institutionalize the BEI and LAP to expand youth employment in schools? Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Ndlovu. Honorable Majola.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Greetings to colleagues and stakeholders present. A couple of submissions, Madam Chair. Welcoming a call that's coming from Amandla, Mobi, and COSATU to align SRD to poverty line. I want to check from both stakeholders, Madam Chair, with regards to that call, to be precisely as to how would they love to see us adjusting from 370 to what sort of an acceptable level that they would like us to align the SRD grant. Moving to section 27 with regards to the provincial equitable share, they have raised the issue of vulnerable provinces, and it was evident, Madam Chair, looking at the difference between what we are adjusting and then what was on the original budget with regards to the provincial share. Just to check on section 27, except the late dated nature of the data we use, what other recommendations they can submit to us if we were to review or amend the provincial equitable formula. The other one is to COSATU, the debt owed to municipality which has reached the alarming figure of close to 300 billion rands by the three categories of customers being households, business, and government. I want to check from the government, noting their submission with regards to move to the prepaid electricity meters. That's a component of the solution. But with regards to the department, the government department, what will be their submission to us to make it sure that we reduce that billion, noting its implications, because the municipality end up not able to service their own debt to their bulk suppliers, being electricity and water authorities. The last one, it also goes to COSATO with their strong support of the Urban Development Grant, which is supported, noting the decay we are experiencing in our urban, in particular the metros. But aligning that with the struggling rural municipalities, what will be the COSATO's advice to avoid the intermigrations from the rural municipality, which adding the burden to the metro municipality in terms of providing service delivery? How can we balance between the urban development grant and also developing the struggling rural municipality? Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Majola. Welcome, Honorable Fritz.
Good morning, Honourable Chair, Honourable Members, and everybody on this platform. Once again, thank you for all the submissions and presentations that we received. It helps to shape our opinions, to inform our deliberations, and then, of course, to influence the recommendations. I'm going to start with Amandla Mobi. Now, I'm going to say the following. First of all, Amandla Mobi, I will defend your right to have an opinion and to express that opinion in public. But I don't think you have a right to everybody's opinion. I don't think it is correct to mention and to single out a member of a committee of parliament for that member's political views. But coming back to your presentation, you made mention of the so-called health tax. Now, my views on health tax is known. I've made it known on this platform many times before. But to add another tax is not going to assist either our economy or the poor. There are many forms of wealth taxes already in existence, which was pointed out by National Treasury only last week. Coming to BJC, now BJC made a number of practical and sensible recommendations that is really helpful in shaping our opinion. Thank you for that. Coming to the Rural Health Advocacy Project, now you've pointed out HIV and TB treatment, and you've made a comment that Parliament must decide if allocations are adequate to prevent service deterioration. I totally agree with you. At this very moment, we have to look at the current funding, models, and compare that to the service delivery outcomes. So I totally agree with you. But of course, you also made a very valuable contribution towards the PEPFAR funds, and I think this is where the Special Appropriations Bill, which is coming up, is really necessary to fill the medium-term or short-term gap that has been left by the withdrawal of some international funds. You also asked the question, who bears the social cost of lower inflation, Anchor? Now, in that regard, the Deputy Minister Saropen already in his presentation after the medium-term budget policy statement was delivered by the minister, outlined that the lower income segment will eventually stand to gain the most from inflation anchor, and he used the example, pardon, whether or when a poor household must decide whether they are going to pay buy toothpaste, which is rather expensive, or whether they are going to buy basic foodstuff. But going forward, I share your concern or your concerns regarding nurse training, clinics, spaces, patient follow-up, logistics, etc. This committee on a recent oversight visit to the Northwest saw firsthand the effect that basic service delivery, or how basic service delivery is affected by these concerns that you are raising. So I totally share your concerns in this regard, especially in my province where I come from and the province that I represent, the Eastern Cape. Basic service delivery in respect of health services in rural areas is a huge concern. Coming to your recommendation of funding levels that do not align with service delivery realities, I think you underscore the necessity for a conditional grant review, but not only on the surface. This review should go to the core of the issue, and that is how the current grants are rolled out and implemented in provinces and municipalities. Coming to the Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition, which was presented by Section 27. I don't link between the Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition and Section 27, and I think more disclosure is necessary to establish that link between the two organizations. Now, coming to your presentation itself, it is good to see that my home province, the Eastern Cape, is presented and that you've made your presentation to the committee, and that is welcomed. I just want to switch on my video again. Okay, there you are. Now, you emphasize that the Eastern Cape are failing its citizens in respect of healthcare and health access. I totally agree. When we go and look at the current situation in the Eastern Cape, that is what we found widespread throughout the province, and I share that sentiment. And it is really time that both national government, as the National Council of Provinces and the province of the Eastern Cape take hands and address these issues. I totally support your recommendation, especially at enhanced oversight over conditional grant performance. And once again, that underscores the necessity of a deep dive into the current grant system. The recommendations are tailor-made for the challenges facing the Eastern Cape, and thank you for that. It is of great help. You also underscore the need for grant reform and especially the practical rollout, as I've mentioned before, and I welcome that presentation. But we also need to refocus underspending. You've made mention of historic overspending in the Eastern Cape province. I totally agree that is a problem, but we should also start looking at the effective spending of available funds. That also seems to be a problem, where funds are spent, costs increase, and service delivery decrease. That is a huge problem, and I think we should refocus the spending of funds, and not only trying to spend the available funds, but where it is spent, that we have to make sure that it is spent in the best possible way to achieve the best possible outcome. Coming to equal education, you also raised and highlighted challenges that contribute, according to me, to a bigger systemic and institutional issues relating to NSFAS. If we consider only the past year, how many times NSFAS made the news for all the wrong reasons? I think it is time to reevaluate NSFAS in its current form in its totality. There are too many stories and too much evidence of a failing NSFAS system. Coming to youth capital. Youth capital, I share your sentiments regarding unemployment or youth unemployment, and I found this a very helpful presentation. You've highlighted the need, and I really agree with that. You highlighted the need for urgent measures to open up the economy, the need to get rid of red tape, standing in the way of entrepreneurs to open up their own businesses. And that's, of course, a sector where youth unemployment can be addressed in a very relevant short time. And we need to redefine who and what big business is. Currently, regulations come into play when a company has 50 or more employees. And personally, I don't think that should be counted as big business. But you also highlighted the need to tackle failed empowerment measures that keep the majority of South Africans still out of jobs and only enriched a very few political connected. Mr. Colin Africa, thank you very much. You've made a very valid point, and that is to get politics out of the way of business. Government must, and I totally agree with you, government must create the environment in which businesses can thrive. And that is what we require urgently to create jobs and new employment opportunities. Coming to COSATU, pardon, I have a runny nose. Coming to COSATU, once again, welcome to Mr. Matthew Parks, our old friend in this committee. Now, Mr. Parks touched on municipal failures pointing to systemic failures. I totally agree. The majority of municipalities are in distress and some even in only a mess. But going into 2026, we are going to focus much more on municipalities for obvious reasons. And it is high time that these are effectively addressed. 30 years is a long time for people to wait for effective local government. And yes, hopefully the new or the revised white paper on local government will assist us in the way forward. But however, Mr. Parks mentioned the DDM model. I'm still not convinced that the DDM model is going to take us anywhere. We haven't seen any successes where the DDM was implemented. We haven't seen any evidence that the DDM is currently successfully implemented anywhere. So I put a huge question mark behind the DDM as the savior of local government. So with that, Madam Chair and honorable members and everybody on the platform, that is my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Brits. I earlier on noted the hand of Honorable Swart. I just want to confirm if he's still on the platform, as he earlier indicated that he will leave the platform before the end of the meeting. I don't think he's still here. Now let me start with Amandla Mobi to kindly respond to submissions by members, whether questions or comments made by members.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The comments are well received and noted. In response to Honorable Majola's question about how we'd recommend the SRD grant be increased. So many of our recommendations, so most of the time our recommendation is that a person needs at least a little over 760 to meet their minimum monthly needs. So that would be our recommendation, that if the grant is increased, it is increased to that amount, but beyond that, Honorable Chair, that it is kept until it is turned into a basic income grant of a higher amount, so people who are not able to support themselves in the country are able to do so. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I get Lisa for Budget Justice Coalition?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee members for the questions. I will respond to Honourable Ryder first. I think maybe you've misunderstood our position. We aren't against TARS. I think there are different positions across the members in our organisation. But overall, what we haven't seen is a clear explanation on how decisions are being made. I think we've repeatedly called for human rights impact assessments to accompany any major decisions, particularly budget cuts. And what our concern is that in this first round of TARS, the savings that we've seen identified, we don't believe that they are responsible, and we don't think that there's been enough evidence or any evidence really to accompany the decision for example, why $1 billion was cut from CSG, besides saying that there was poor take-up of the grant. What we're hearing from our members is the reason for the poor take-up of the grant is largely around the eligibility criteria and the exclusions that have been introduced, but also other things like young mothers who haven't been able to get ID documents, young mothers who haven't been able to register the births of their children, and you know, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, when I was looking into this before, I saw GTAC had made a presentation with a spending review framework that was very detailed. It required identifying theory of change, identifying beneficiaries, what the impact would be. And that's kind of what we thought might happen with TARS, but that's not what we're seeing. We do support savings on sort of ghost posts, particularly where those funds are redirected to frontline posts. You know, exorbitant payments for property rentals and things like that. But we wouldn't like to see savings being made at the expense of the sort of poorest and most vulnerable members of our society. Honourable Suisa, I think, yeah, I share your concerns. I lift up almost every item I pick up, have a look underneath to see where it's made, and it's quite discouraging to see how, you know, rarely you'll see a South African made product. And yeah, particularly in agriculture, admittedly, BJC hasn't been looking at the agriculture grants or budget for long. It's come up in some of our community engagements and in the increasing concerns around food security. So we were quite concerned to see some of the figures there, sort of reductions to the agro-processing marketing program and very poor spending on food security, which doesn't make sense in our context. I think in terms of how Parliament can assist, I think perhaps it starts with the National Department of Agriculture, perhaps to try and understand why some of these trends are persisting, why we're seeing such poor spending on food security programs, why the reduction to the agro-processing marketing program. You know, what are the reasons for these reductions? Perhaps there are valid reasons, but it certainly needs to be interrogated. And then on the very poor spending on the agriculture conditional grants, the land care and Tsima and others, I have noticed that it has been that the spending has been quite poor over a few years, over a few quarters. So it certainly requires some attention, particularly in those provinces that we highlighted, where spending is around 12% or less halfway through the year. And as you say, there really needs to be a lot more done to support upcoming farmers, not only to support livelihoods, but also food security. So yeah, on why, I think it would be investigating why and perhaps requiring more frequent reporting to identify slow spending sort of earlier on. I think on the provincial equitable share, we did see some adjustments to the provincial equitable share that were based on updated data, but it wasn't clear to me, perhaps I missed it, whether all of the data that is used in the formula has been updated. I think earlier this year it was stated that it was still drawing a lot of the information from Census 2011, but I think that this committee should be asking whether the allocations are adequate. And I think Equal Education raised the point that perhaps, in the example of the Northern Cape, where the population is low, but because of the low population density, you need more schools. And some of this sort of detail is missing from the formula. So I think the answer is just to continue to look at that formula and the data that's used and ask whether whether it's allocated. Whether it's adequate, sorry, should I say. In terms of
wrap up, Lisa?
Okay, sorry, one more point. In terms of the accountability monitor, I think it's really about identifying and addressing the root causes of underspending. We don't think that the public should have to pay the price for slow procurement processes or other issues that happen within the department, within the national, provincial, or wherever it is. We can't keep seeing those funds cut. Perhaps around looking at the AG powers. I'm sitting in Makana municipality here. I think we've received 6 disclaimed audits, and it seems like possibly a 7th is on the way. And despite all the interventions and various visits from committees and departments, there's very little change. So really, I think it's about accountability, and it's about protecting the public who rely on these services. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Russell, kindly summarize the responses and submissions of members. Rural Health Advocacy Project, Russell. I think there's an indication that Rural Health Advocacy Project is not here. Unfortunately, we'll have to move to another stakeholder, Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action. Kanyisa, you're invited to respond to submissions and questions by members.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the honourable members for firstly allowing us as the Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition to make the presentation that we did, and for your positive comments. Just to clarify some of the concern around what looks like Section 27 representing itself and ECAC, the Eastern Cape The Eastern Cape Health Crisis Action Coalition is a coalition of organizations that include Section 27 and various other organizations. Some of those organizations include communities as well as clinic committees, and so here we as Section 27 were asked by the clinic committee in Pilani as well as New Rest Clinic to assist them with making the presentations to Parliament. Obviously, being our work, we endeavored to make platforms like this accessible to the people that we work with, particularly at the grassroots level. And so our appearance here was simply just to navigate the space with them and help them to navigate the space so that they are able to bring their concerns to this platform. I would just like to, if possible, to extend a request to the committee to consider perhaps a oversight visit to Komani, mainly just to see the issues that we were speaking about in our presentation as well as our submission firsthand, and in order for you to get the first-hand experience of what people in the region are going through and what the committee could do to assist that situation. So just once again, thank you so much for affording the clinic committee in Newrest and Pilani an opportunity to present to you, and we look forward to any further engagements beyond this on the issues that we have brought to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khanyisa. Mahfouz and Siyabulela on behalf of Equal Education. Equal Education.
Apologies, Chair. I'll come in first and then hand over to Siyabulela to take on the questions related to higher education and NSFAS in particular. So there were just maybe honorable riders comments on the 98% of eradicated pit latrines. Well, firstly, I'm glad that you're aware that other backlogs exist and those need to be funded to be eradicated. But also the 98% claim is very misleading if you interpret it as 98% of pit latrines being eradicated or replaced. The minister herself says this is only 98% of those identified in a 2018 audit. And so there's increasingly a large amount of data showing hundreds of schools that are still reliant or have pit latrines in their toilets, in the system, over and above the ones that have been previously identified. We note the 42 million to conduct a revised audit, and we hope really that this time they can get much better accurate data. It's really the 21st century and we're committing a lot of money to this audit, so a lot hopefully can be done on that in terms of making sure that it's reliable. But the funding for school infrastructure is really needed. On the questions of Honorable Siwisas asked what funding is required to stabilize frontline services in health and education. So on education, last year to the NCOP Committee on Education, different provinces together with the Department of Basic Education did present some of their budgetary pressures. And to keep the post-provisioning norms stable, as it currently is, between the years 2024-25 to 2027-28, so for those 4 years, they needed an additional 76 billion rand, just only for the frontline services, right? And so it's not clear whether this has been funded, and well, it certainly hasn't, because the Western Cape cut teachers, and in KwaZulu-Natal there's shortfalls as well, among many other provinces. And then there was a sort of a question on how to institutionalize BEEI. Maybe Siwa will speak to it a bit more, but certainly the first step is to fund it. Honorable Ndlovu, I hope that one is noted. And then reviews to the provincial equitable share formula. Members, I think you may be familiar that 48% of the provincial equitable share formula is determined by the education component. The education component only looks at the number of learners in schools. There's an announcement by Treasury that it's being updated, but that there's delays to the update because they don't have the latest or updated data on poverty statistics from the Income and Expenditure Survey. So the update, we're not clear exactly how, and there hasn't been transparency around this, it's going to look, but it also finally doesn't just look at all learners as the same, it also weights for poverty and disability. And so it's important to include those weights so that you can target funding to those in greater need. But beyond this, I think it's so these weights should be introduced quite urgently. I think there is some data that you can work with in the meantime, even if the data hasn't been updated. But beyond this, also I think it's important to wait for the rural component or rurality component within the education component, because there are these unique needs. As I mentioned, schools are more further dispersed, and some things are a bit more expensive to procure in a rural area than others. And so let me hand over to Sia.
Okay, thank you, Mafuz. Chair, I'll just touch on the NSFAS question. I think when we are looking at NSFAS, we have to understand that it's built within three things, which is the design, the funding, and the administration. And the ICT question, it touches on the administration side, which is not entirely the problem, but part of the problem. So there, what government can do is to have stronger oversight on how these processes are going, and also to diversify the skills development way so that we can also expand to other pathways of improving the skills of youth, so that we don't have this much number of students that are dependent on NSFAS, because it also brings in the question of the formal education system. Within the existing ICT, the NSFAS can also modernize its system. This can be done by building in within its system a flagging element where inconsistencies by an applicant can be highlighted as they apply and also after they have applied, so that a student doesn't have to be subjected to a rejection by the NSFAS just because they didn't submit a small thing when they missed an application section. And also we have to reduce the dependency on external contractors so that the system can self-sustain, because there's a problem with having people from the private thingy coming into something that is for the public, because the aim there, it won't be able to restore the dignity of the students, especially the dignity of an African child, because it is Black South Africans or Black youth that is dependent on the system. And this can also be done by the modular microservice architecture. So this approach, it is an approach where if you submit your information anywhere in government, it is able to be absorbed by the system. If you are applying for something else, that system will also be able to absorb that information that you have already completed elsewhere. So to shorten the process of the approvement and also the disbursement of funds, so that the students cannot be subjected to the violent reality of NSFAS, of having to continuously prove that they are poor, deserving, and also need funding. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Siyabulela and Mafuz. Can I now invite Section 27, Matshidiso and Mdu, to respond to questions or even comments by members? Colleagues, kindly try to summarize. I'm not being unfair. I'm just looking at the time. Kindly try to summarize your responses.
Thank you, Chairperson. The comments and contributions from members of the committee are well received. So the first one on SIBG from Honorable Ryder, I believe that is something we agree on the potential impact of SIBG being absorbed into the IEG, and as well as this thinking, which can be a tad retraction, is that the eradication of pit toilets means that school infrastructure is no longer a large problem as it was before, which still is, even with the reduction of pit toilets. So our position, which we have raised in previous submissions, is that in the case that SIBG is absorbed into EIT, levels of funding with the new mesh grant must be maintained and be at the same level as SIBG and EIT were when they were separate. And given that the EIG has been shown to be a better performer, we hope that that will translate into the new grant as well. I think that's it, Honorable Ryder. On the comments and questions raised by Honorable Majola with regards to recommendations for the provincial equitable share. I think a much more appropriate way of looking at it would be to look at the whole provincial funding framework, including conditional grants. And there's a need for improvement overall to make sure that provinces get the appropriate funding to fund their operations. We also think that the formula itself, to answer Honorable Majola, is that the formula itself must recognize the different contexts and needs of provinces. So one of the things that it must recognize is the differences between the rural and urban divide and how this affects people. I think Mahfouz had mentioned something to this effect on education. Same holds true for healthcare. So the needs of a province that's rural, sparsely populated, and does not have as many facilities are different from a more urban, which has more density and in many cases has existing facilities, although they may not be in good shape as well. So having a recognition of that would in the formula would go a long way in helping. Also, related to that, the redistributive bias component to the PERS formula, so the 3% in the formula that's allocated to the poverty as a component of the formula could use a revisit and might be improved as well. And lastly, I think foregrounding the formula to ensure that both health and education for all provinces are well funded within the formula, and that the money that's allocated in the formula goes directly to those services and reaches the people would be a good way to improve the formula. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Can I now invite Youth Capital?
Yes, I'm here. I'm going to be very brief, and I just want to excuse Colin because he had some network issues, so he can't answer directly. But I wanted to thank Honorable Ryder and Honorable Brits for acknowledging lived experiences of young people, and Youth Capital is really hoping that there is a commitment to find solutions to address these lived experiences of unemployment. And then also to respond to Honorable Ndlovu on the role of Parliament, I think I want to echo what my colleague Mahfouz said about, the institutionalizing the Basic Education Employment Initiative, which is the largest public employment program for young people to date, will be to fund it and also fund it long term, because these programs are often invisible. In 2024, because of funding issues, the Basic Education Employment Initiative didn't take place. It wasn't implemented. And I think it's really important for Parliament to have an oversight role and ensuring that youth unemployment for that matter, and then of course with the specific angle on youth, is reported on, and it is a goal that needs to be challenged. So long-term funding and also institutionalizing overseeing with the oversight role on the spending priorities of our government. This is all from us. Thank you so much.
Comrade Matthew, please come in with the responses.
Okay. No, thanks, Chair, and thanks, honourable members. I think just a few questions. No, Chair, we would agree with members about that we need to really prioritize frontline posts, be it doctors and nurses, teachers or police, people who have a high impact, or people at Home Affairs, for example, at SARS, where we have often seen a very worrying vacancy rates. The Home Affairs, I think, is like 60%. We've seen a rise at teacher-to-learner ratio, etc. And we haven't, let me say, we've seen worrying indications in this year's budget that not all of those posts committed to in the budget have been filled yet. So that is a worrying point. And I think we agree with Honourable Ryder that where we need to fill vacancies, let it be on the front line as opposed to senior management. Chair, we agree with the Honourable Rider. We must really commend the municipal workers at Midval for a clean audit. And I'm sure those are members of SAM or COSATU's affiliate on a lighter note. But we would agree, we need to have more good stories. And I think we've seen quite a few this year, which gives us hope. Chair, we really do hope on local government, because that really seems to be the one area of government where we're struggling. We've seen progress at Eskom, at Transnet, at Metrorail, at SARS, etc. Local government, it really seems to be the Achilles heel. So we hope that the trading services or the urban development grant intervention in the metros will help play a role. We hope the 140 municipalities capacitation program helps, etc., or the Mpumalanga project too. But I think, Chair, just given the level of deterioration, we really need to kind of expedite these issues and have frank discussions where we should be taking up the offer from Eskom, for example, or from Sandro. If municipalities just don't have the capacity to provide electricity or water or roads, why can't we engage these utilities or the Department of Water and Sanitation, etc.? Chair, I think we must really be deeply concerned about the situation of Eskom electricity prices and the fact that local government is at the heart of that. If Eskom is bleeding 20 billion rand because of municipal debt, this is why they're dependent upon these double-digit tariff hikes. And we're seeing companies like Glencore, Samancor going through retrenchments now. So we need to get a handle of the situation. I think Chair needs both a short-term relief solution, but a longer-term plan. And for us, Chair, ultimately, that it has to be that all of us move towards prepaid. And the members are right. It's not just about poverty. It's often you find government institutions, businesses, hotels, embassies themselves are culprits are not paying. Chair, I think for us, Honourable Glover asked about oversight for local government. We would emphasize maybe a few priority points. The number of those who owe salaries or pensions is one indicator. The number of those who are in debt. Often you find the debt to Eskom, it tends to be in a few municipalities like Maluti, Pafong, and they have serious levels of debt. The numbers of those who are not able to spend on infrastructure or maintain services. Those who really, when you talk to Cogta and Salga, can give you horror stories about capacitation. That if I think it's a Botla, none of the senior management team had more than a matric certificate. Yet you expect senior managers to be qualified engineers, electricians, etc., etc. And I think, Chair, to engage with Cogta around the new funding model, we have to move towards that as a sustainable solution. Chair, I think also to Honourable Brits, some of the municipalities we think are just not sustainable. We have 257. We should be having a discussion about in some instances, does it make sense to consolidate some of them together? Like, for example, in the Karoo, we have 4 very small municipalities. But then again, what support would they need from Cogta? Because if you're paying a municipal manager, for example, in Prince Albert, less than what you would pay a private secretary in Cape Town, then you're not going to get the kind of skills you need. So we need to have a more thoughtful, long-term approach. Chair, just on the SOD grant, look, we welcome the 2 billion rand additional now, but I think in the 5 years that it's been rolled out, it's only once been adjusted for inflation. That for us is unacceptable. That people who are so poor, who just want to buy a loaf of bread a day, we can't even adjust it for inflation. And we think, Chair, the inflation amount for this year, for example, would have been very small. It would have been about 1.5 billion rand. We could easily have found that without collapsing the state. We think, Chair, a fair process can be that over the MTEF, let's raise it to the food poverty line, which is about 750 roughly. But also, Chair, we should be linking its participants to skills opportunities, to employment opportunities where possible. So we could try to increase the number of people working and reduce the number of people who are dependent on social grants. But ultimately, we need these kind of interventions, Chair, because you can't afford to leave so many people unemployed behind, whilst we find the fundamental terms of growing the economy, etc. So I think, Chair, that is largely it, Chair. I think I covered the Eskom issue. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, members.
Thank you very much, Kwasatu. I think, honorable members, we must agree that this brings us to the end of the engagement on presentations made before this committee by different stakeholders. Honorable members, stakeholders, and guests, as we conclude today's public hearings on the 2025 Adjustments, Appropriations Bill and the Division of Revenue Amendments Bill, I truly want to extend my sincere gratitude to all who participated and contributed to this critical process. As I said, your inputs have been invaluable, shedding light on the challenges facing provinces and municipalities, particularly in delivering essential services like education, your healthcare, and infrastructure, etc. We've had concerns about provincial equitable share, conditional grants, performance, and strains of the fiscal pressures on frontline services. As the committee of the NCOP, we meticulously consider these insights to ensure budget adjustments empower provinces and municipalities to meet their obligations, especially for vulnerable communities. Our oversight role demands that we translate these discussions which we had today into actionable recommendations that will reflect the realities on the ground. I want to once again thank SALGA, PBO, FFC, Treasury, and all stakeholders for your constructive engagement in this process. Your participation will definitely strengthen our democracy and enhances service delivery. We're now looking forward to producing a comprehensive committee report with specific and clear recommendations to guide the NCOP decisions on these crucial pieces of legislation. I truly want to thank all the stakeholders for making time to make their submissions to the committee and appearing before the committee to make their presentations. It is really helpful. I would like to indicate to members of parliament that we will deal with the set of minutes that were meant to be considered today in the next week's meeting. In that note, colleagues, enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your day. And I know members of parliament will be going into the NCOP sitting. I would like to end our discussions for today by saying that I really appreciate your efforts. I really appreciate your time and working with you all colleagues, the support staff, the stakeholders and members of parliament makes my work very easy as a chairperson of this committee. I see myself as being part of the team with different role players that really plays their part in doing what is expected of them to do. Have a great evening, colleagues. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.